Hello and welcome to episode 72 of The Imperial Truth. I'm Greg.
And I'm Neil.
Hey Neil, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you, Greg?
Yeah, mustn't grumble. Before we go anywhere, you can go and buy all your latest plastic toys at Element Games. And if you go through the link we put in the show notes or through the website banner, you will also support the show. And you can buy some of those. The Repulsor's out now for 40k and the Chaplain. Oh, the Chaplain. Looks amazing.
There's tons of great new Primus Marine stuff, and some of it looks good painted up heresy-wise as well.
Yeah, we had a discussion about that actually at the event with some people, and the shoulder pads and the heads are the same size. So if you buy upgrade sprues, you can put them on there, and you can have true scale in bunny ears heresy stuff if you want, and you can play around with it. Or if you want to see some Alpha Legion players who want to include some of them in their army as potential for a starter for Dawn, something like that. Or
you've got a slightly bigger scale, which means you can do a lot more with it. And I saw a good Redemptor Dreadnought painted as Iron Warriors.
Yeah, Ben Greaves.
Yeah, and it looks. I mean, all his stuff looks great. But that in particular, I thought it fitted in perfectly with all the other dreadnoughts. It didn't look out of place.
What was he calling it? An Olympus pattern Leviathan with, and he's put, made sure it's got the right weapon loadout. Again, your more Puritan heresy players might not agree, but I think it does look quite good if you can play around with it a little bit.
Yeah.
Putting a stock model down, maybe not, but anything that looks good and doesn't, fully break the immersion. It's not that much different to a Leviathan. Yes, it does look different, but in scale and everything else, it's fairly similar.
It does. And what I thought was quite good is that if you were looking, we often talk about trying to do heresy on a budget.
Yeah.
Again, this is more options. This is more ways of doing it on a budget.
Yeah, and
because let's face it, Leviathan Dreadnoughts are the go-to at the moment, and if you can pick up ones that you could use, like say a plastic Dreadnought and use it as Leviathan, then you're going to save some pennies.
Yeah, and I think the problem is when people are just looking to save money, so they take their plastic Redemptor, build it, put it on the table, build it, paint it, put it on the table without an effort to make it fit into the system. So, Ben doesn't do that. Ben went for it partly because he's got Leviathans coming out of his ear rolls. He's got loads of different dreads. So he wanted to break that up a little bit, and it looks cool within that. Now,
it does, and all of his stuff is very unified because of the paint scheme and things, and it all suits, doesn't it?
Yeah, and if you're more hardcore into the history side of things, then obviously you're not going to want to do it. But I think it's quite cool to do that, and we've had this discussion a lot of times. It's hard to define what is cool and what's not cool to use in the heresy, but most of the time upon looking at it that it doesn't fit, because we've got a big question mark at the moment with drop pods. No Dreadnought drop pods. Other people are looking for ways to use normal drop. Can I use normal drop pods? Well, they're not the same size. No, not everyone can build their own.
Yep.
So and actually, Ben's thing brought up another thing because it was on a group and it got taken down as being not heresy, but third party stuff. Where does that fit in? If you're looking at it like that, if someone's made a bit of an effort, who's the arbiter to say that you've done enough or it's heresy enough when it's not an actual heresy model? Because some people don't like the plastic rhinos being used. There are some, but there's different people in every sort of system like that. That's it. Well, they're hardcore into the historical side, the setting, the historical side of things, and they want it
the rivet
to
counters.
Yeah, they want it to look different. I think that's the biggest part, because rhinos, you're quite legitimate to use those rhinos, that kind of thing, but they want it to stand out and be different. And just as long as we there's no point in getting on each other for the different ways of playing. And again, you can voice your opinion, or I don't appreciate that style of thing, but let's not bust each other up for it. But anyway, Element Games, go and buy plastic
Element
stuff.
Games, done. Yeah.
The Redemptor as well, the floating heavy tank for the Primaris could very easily be a grav vehicle for your for your custodies or whatever, if you wanted to go, or for your mechanicum, if you wanted to go, into a more advanced kind of out there style Dark Mechanicum, and you wanted a version of the Macro Carried, you could alter that up, not put so much of the stuff on, and then swap the weapons out. So yeah, but you can go to Element Games and get all that juicy stuff, and there'll be loads more definitely. As well.
There's loads coming out, so it's great that there's so much cool stuff coming out, and Element Games are a great place to go and get all your toys. So I will now take on Lil Legend Studios. So as we know, Miles is a great advocate of painting and teaching people how to paint. And it's great to go and have a look at this stuff. If you haven't seen any of the stuff, you probably haven't realised you've seen it because it is everywhere. It's on Instagram, it's on Facebook, it's on Twitter, and he's doing all sorts of wonderful stuff with teaching people how to paint PDFs on, guides and bits and pieces. So if you're thinking about painting something and you want it painted and you don't want to paint it, give him a look. If you want to paint something and you're thinking you don't know how to do it justice, again, go to Miles, see what he could help you with. There could be a course on there or something you want to get gen up on and get good at, and then see what he can do. He can, teach you online. You could download documents. There's all sorts of stuff he can do for you. So go and check him out.
Yeah, definitely. And we had the couple of winners last episode, so they're going on to get their lessons with him, which is pretty cool. And go and check out his Patreon as well, because that's cool. I have finally released my episode of Fanatic, the first proper one. So it's about 40k. You can head over there and jump into that with Dan from the Ashes of the Imperium podcast, who's, he's a great guy, and I know him from the Warhammer scene. Absolutely fantastic chap. We have a good chat, and I've had some really good feedback on that as well, which thank you very much for that. Absolutely brilliant. But cool. You been doing anything, Neil?
I've been painting Korax, getting him done, so he's coming along quite nicely. I'm getting a few bits and pieces. I had a few. I went into a bit of a lull. I didn't get too much done, but I've managed to crack out a few good hours, and it's amazing how a few jumps in progress have actually sort of reignite everything, and I can see things sort of falling into place again. And it's always cool with the Primarch models, because you often find little hidden bits that you didn't realise were there. And we've talked about before, like Kurz and all the faces in the cloak. And I was painting Korax's backpack and realised that the way it's designed is that it's like two raven skulls on the shoulders,
right? Yeah,
that have the air intake as like the eye socket. And it's only when you sort of really study these things that you see, oh, I see what he's done there. It's like, so it's, those cool little things you find, and makes it a little bit more enjoyable to paint.
Awesome. We haven't seen that much of it on Instagram though.
No, well, I was waiting. My plan was, I've done a bit. I've done the main body. I was working on the backpack at the moment, but what I wanted to try and do was get the backpack done and then post some pictures up of that. So I will try and push through and get the backpack done, then do the wings and then the head, and then he's pretty much there once I've done those bits. Cool
stuff. Excellent. I've been this week and however long, last 2 weeks really. Haven't done a lot of hobby at all. We've had various bits going on, little things are getting away, and the next stage is on a few of my armies involved a lot of airbrushing, and just didn't have the time to sit down and kind of do it like how I wanted to do it. And Friday I was going to sit down, and we had a call out with the fire brigade, typical sod's law really, but that looks to be stopping soon, so might be moving on from that job. But I've got all the knights out today and did the first layer of the blue, which took a considerable amount of time because there's a lot of different panels, and trying to play around with the airbrush. Got to look at the airbrush because I've got a few issues with it. I'm like, it's currently taken apart at the moment and sitting in some cleaning fluid. So hopefully that solves that. But I've got another 2 or 3 layers to do on that. So I have to find an evening at some point where I can sit down and crack on with that, because the only problem with an airbrush is if you're doing a lot of stuff with it, you have to be able to crack the airbrush out to get on with painting. And
Yes.
I feel a bit off doing that in the front room when, the missus is there trying to catch up on Game of Thrones. So, yeah, there's a bit of a balance in that. I kind of I haven't got another project at the moment that I can get on with the brushes until I've done a few more stages of airbrushing on different armies. So, yeah, we will crack on with that as soon as possible and get back to getting those knights up and done, because I used them in 40k again the other day, and they were really cool in that, and I know they can be fun for Heresy as well. And if I can get one of the normal the plastic knights done, maybe I can use that as some of the events as a freebie for armies, maybe just people who are struggling or put into hard matchups, something like that. But,
Yeah, it'd be useful. Yeah, definitely.
yeah, I always feel a bit funny lending my toys out. Because, I know if an accident's going to happen, it's probably going to happen with my stuff. So, but yeah, we'll see. We'll see on that one. Okay, the Forge World, quite quiet over the last couple of weeks. But what we got was pretty cool. I don't think you can remember. So we've had the...
I cannot even remember. I remember that the last few times they've sent an email out or I've looked on there, I've been sort of very nonplussed.
Yeah, we had the Sakaran Punishers. We seem to be getting like one thing a week, really, and like then 1 week without anything. But we haven't had any kind of like lump release. It's literally been one, maybe two items. So we got nothing kind of this week. They released they're working on a Warhammer 40k character series, which is really cool because actually this guy could be used for Heresy. It's Gabriel Angelos, Chapter Master of the Blood Ravens. So
yeah, he looks cool.
Yeah, from the computer game, he does look cool, and that's very easy to take that armor and put it into the Heresy somewhere. Oh.
Yes, because it's the what's the name, Terminator pattern, isn't it? The
Cataphracti.
Tartarus.
Yeah, Tartarus. Trying to remember. Mine's gone blank. Not having looked at him in a while. But we also, but he can easily be put into a Heresy army. And then we had the Sisters of Silence Charon Pattern Acquisitor, which is the fantastic child catching ship.
Yeah, the child catcher.
Which £85. It's not cheap, but it's a wonderful piece of kit.
I really liked it. I thought it was. I'd pay £85 for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not saying I wouldn't. It's it's a transporter. It does some cool stuff. Don't get me wrong, but it's a transport. It's £85. Sometimes it's like, but it is really cool, and a lot of people have been waiting for these for a while. They are
what
fantastic.
It does is, if you are interested in playing Sisters, you've got it's starting to get a little bit more interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, the real punishing thing you can do is take your Sisters army and then put your Custodes in it.
Well, yeah.
If you want to play that way. But yeah, no, it's a fantastic kit, and we got the Blood Angels Legion transfer sheet as well, which pleased some people, I think.
I think there's a lot of people, Blood Angels players, that were really sort of excited to get their stuff.
Yeah, I mean, all the teardrops. Miles will be delighted, and there's some really pretty pieces of art on that, as there should be for the Blood Angels. Did a cracking job. And then on the Black Library side of things, we got Talon eventually. So Talon's out in a regular format, which is again brilliant. And I just finished reading. You'll find with Gaz reading Lorgar, Bearer of the Word. You'll hear all about that later. But yeah, Talon, we're up to book 45. Blimey!
Wow.
Yep. You know it, bruv, which means I've got to order it as well, actually. I was like, oh, yeah, Talon, I've read that. I was like, oh, no, it's going to go in the series, isn't it? So I know they've got rid of the 10 million tanks thing written down. It's just millions of tanks. But it's not the story that some people thought it was, but I thought it was going to be. But it's a very good read. And, in fact, you can go back and listen to the episodes we did with John about that one. The first interview with him, which got his own titled episode, which makes it easy to look for, which is really good. On that note, in fact, because that's pretty much all the releases we've had. On that note, we got I am currently working on getting a list of all the shows with the links ready on the website so that people can have a one-stop shop to look up all 70-odd shows and have a flick through to find them, because I know that going through the feed sometimes on iTunes or going through the episode posts on the website is not a brilliant thing. And those are the main two places I worry about doing it. I was actually looking at SoundCloud thinking maybe I should worry about SoundCloud, but there's some rumours that that's not going to be an issue for a huge amount of time. The interesting issues going on with SoundCloud at the moment, which is something to be aware of if you host a podcast there. But I thought if I can have a page on the website where they're all listed out and give a brief description of what we talk about, then that might help people find their shows a little bit easier going through the back catalogue.
Yeah, definitely.
There's quite a lot of content there now. And particularly some of the older shows, the titles weren't as kind of descriptive of what we were talking about, which is kind of cool. I like the idea of shows having cool titles, but when you're trying to find, where was the one where you did this, it's easier to have like the subjects of what you do listed out in the title. Slightly less fun and cool, but slightly more useful. Yeah, I'll be boring and useful every now and then. What are you going to do?
I always call you boring and sometimes useful.
Never to my face. So,
yeah,
that's it. And then just before we move on, First Blood still coming up. We've got all the Element games, and we've got not a huge amount of tickets sold. I think I possibly picked the wrong time of year and left it a little bit late. But if you want to come, we will, and if there's less people, we will just make it more narrative. Because that's the beauty, that's the thing you can't do when you've got a lot of people at an event. So don't worry, it's going ahead. We are playing, and I say if it's less narrative, if it's less people, it'll be more narrative. I've got Tom coming up to help out again, helps out London Heresy, so we can.
He was good.
Yeah, he's brilliant. So we can split our time and concentrate on that. So yeah, that's going ahead, and Blood and Glory tickets are now available, and I'll put the links in, and I put them on the website, but Facebook, I'll put them on there again. So you can go to, if you Google search Blood and Glory Bad Dice, I think it's baddice.com/Blood and Glory, but I'll put the links in the show notes and share them again. Then in November, the first weekend of November, we're going to be up in Derby having a big Heresy event up there, and GW are going to be there because alongside that they've got a 40k and Age of Sigmar events, more than one event, so loads of stuff going on with the TV cameras there as well, which will be really good, and you can go and get those tickets and book your hotels up. Wonderful. I think I've done everything, including a hand clap.
I think you may.
Bad form. But we'll move on and we'll talk about our little trip up to Nottingham. Shortly after our previous episode aired, we had a little trip up to Nottingham, didn't we, Neil?
We did, a little road trip.
Yeah, so brilliant. Get up an extra half hour early on your day off, 5:30 or whatever time it was in the morning, so I could get ready, get to Neil, so we could get up to Nottingham for just gone 10. And what was the purpose of our trip up?
Well, I obviously had to... was invited to Golden Demon Winners' Day this year, and this year for the first time they said you're allowed to bring a +1.
Yeah, this is so the Golden Demon Winners' Day. Essentially, it's a way of encouraging people to come and drop their models off to be displayed at Games Workshop. Yeah,
yeah, pretty much. It's a case of we really want to utilise these models. Can you please come and bring them? But we'll treat you to a day at Warhammer World for you travel.
Because otherwise you've just got to drive up there on your own expense. It's, and it's probably better that you come up with a model rather than put it in the post. So,
oh, definitely.
Yeah, it's just, and it doesn't cost Games Workshop a huge amount of money to do it. Let's say they put on some food and some talks. And as you say, this year, as another incentive for people to go up, you bring a +1. So this means things like the Youngbloods category. Did they really want to come up and then be alone in a room with people they don't know? You know, if it's their first entry, and that goes for the same for the older guys as well, guys and girls. You know, do you want to go and stand around with a bunch of people where you might not know anyone and what have you? At least you've got a mate there if you don't know anyone, or a family member, a girlfriend, what have you. So,
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and there was a variety of those around as well. Certainly many of us were non-painters, had our own little conversations going on. But that's good. So this was kind of just fairly slickly organised, I felt, where they had, you know, some pastries and drinks were there for when we got there, and everyone just put their models out on the tables, took up their little badges to say what that model was and what it won. There was a few errors on those, but, you know, that can happen.
Spreadsheet error, apparently, I believe.
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's a very minor thing, isn't it? Everyone pretty much knew whose were whose and what they'd won for. And these models were put out, and they asked for people to bring their first painted model.
Yes.
Did you take your first painted model up, Neil?
No, because I don't own my first painted model. I don't know where it is in the world. It could be in a skip somewhere, or it could be in someone's house. I just don't know.
And you do not care?
And I do not care. I hold very limited number of models. I generally, if I paint something, competition-wise, it usually goes to someone else, or it's been sold, or, you know, I don't generally keep hold of stuff, so I don't have any old models. I don't have any old 40k stuff at all. So I could not partake in that side of it.
No, so we had, as you say, we had Slayer Sword winning models out. We had everything bronze, silver, and gold, and a nice variety from all the different golden demons of the year, accumulating in the major one at Warhammer Fest. And as I said, some first example models, some which were better than others. Certain Mr. David Soper was putting everyone to shame, particularly the non-painters who had turned up. So he painted his first model in 1980 and was using techniques like non-metallic metals. I think there was a little bit of that on there, and some other bits and pieces.
Ahead of his time.
Yeah, well, I didn't look that closely at it, but someone else said there were those, you know. Still, it looked as good as the models I paint now, if not better. So, for all that people tell you it's all about hard work, skill can help.
Yeah, some people do have a natural ability, don't they?
And I'm not saying that, you know, David doesn't work hard on his either. You know, obviously he does. But if you're starting at a point, you know, a head start of 100 metres in a 200 metre race, then that's going to help, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
And there was quite a nice atmosphere. Obviously, it's a strange thing, much like people who win tournaments. People who enter Golden Demon and win, they're, you know, likely to be in with the running another year if they approach it the same manner. So you do get to know the same kind of people.
Yeah,
and
completely.
It's weird from the outside. I had a chat with a couple of people, and it was, some people were talking about a clique and some people weren't. And it's really, really interesting to see how different people view in, because it can be perceived that way when it is and when it isn't.
Yeah, sure. Who? I know you probably don't want to say.
No, I'm not going to say. You know, and
was I in the clique or not?
Oh no specifics were mentioned. Someone said something about how did you feel about the atmosphere, the environment. And I won't say who it was either. And I kind of agree with them a little bit, and I don't think it's necessarily intentional, but it's hard to go into a new environment when it appears that all these people know each other. And I've seen this with Slayer Sword winners down the years, even when we were 13, 14. There were talks about, so-and-so's won it again, typical, yeah, they really like his stuff. And it's like, well, you know what? He probably hangs out with all the best painters talking because they get to know each other. And so it becomes this thing sometimes that from the outside looking in, it looks impenetrable. And that might not be the case. And, you know, with certain people there, they might not be very approachable, and that's fair enough. You know, people are people. Some of them certainly are. and they will talk about everything, but your humanity naturally gravitates to the people that you know. So, yeah, it's quite an interesting little thing to be kind of on the outside of looking in. It didn't bother me. There were people I knew there. There was a lot of people I didn't know there. But I was quite happy to go and sit off to the side. I could only talk painting for so long, before I just lose track. And a lot of it wasn't even like paint. You guys talk about projects. You talk about, what are you planning to enter competition-wise? Which competitions GW otherwise? So there's a lot of that going on, which, you're talking about stuff which I have a passing interest in at best.
Yes.
So it's a different language almost.
Yeah, it's interesting because like you said, I naturally gravitate to people that I know a lot of faces there. I knew the majority of people who they were there because I either know their work and I know of them, or I've met them at numerous other events and we've become not friends, but close acquaintances because you just sort of always see them. So you bump into the same people, you chat to them, and especially sometimes I think these mini demons can also group people together because I would say there's a set of painters that pretty much only paint heresy stuff. So I know all those very closely. There are some painters that paint a broad variety. There's some painters that mainly only paint Age of Sigmar. So you do get those sort of groups as well form where people paint certain types of things. And I knew a few people and I wanted to say hello to everyone and have a good look round. But I found myself not really looking at the models very closely because I felt as though I've seen them all numerous times. I've either seen them, studied them on the internet, or I've seen them in the cabinets.
Yeah.
And I felt as though I didn't really need to spend time just gawping at the models. I would rather speak to the people.
Yeah. And, we had painters who'd won who said that they didn't like the others being there because they wanted to be able to just talk painting with the guys that they know, and that was the reason they want to go. They don't necessarily dig into the fact that these other people are there, but I think it's a necessary thing. I think GW have done the right thing with it by allowing the seconds to go along. So worst case scenario, there's someone there and they are really socially nervous. They can sit with their best mate or their girlfriend or their dad or whoever and just hang out and not be made to feel, that they're not part of, that they're just getting in the way.
Yeah, sure.
And I think that's a really positive thing and needs to be done if this kind of thing, which is going to continue. And I believe it will because, as I say, you need to encourage people to come up to do that because we had to take a day off work to do it. We left your place at 7:00 in the morning. Drive 100 however many miles up. You can't leave straight away because we'll hit all the traffic coming back. So, it's a pain. It's not a hardship, but it's a bit of a pain in the side to try and get out there. So that's cool. And they want them all. They don't want them in dribs and drabs either. They want to be able to show off a Golden Demon exhibit in the miniatures hall.
That's ultimately their goal. They do the exhibition in Warhammer World, and they display as many as they can. I mean, in some previous years, it had been that there was a very, very small amount of people that left their stuff. Some people felt, I know I had some friends who said that they didn't like their stuff being left there because the previous year something got broken or got damaged and they wouldn't leave their models there anymore. And it got to a stage where it was only probably like one cabinet or maybe two cabinets with a few models in. But now it does feel a lot more people are leaving their models there. And if you are really into it and you really want to have a look and learn, that there is a great way of seeing things up close and personal of what people have done, what they've put into categories. It does help you compete by looking at what has won previously.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. You're looking at some things that can inspire, things that can show you a different approach to models, all that kind of jazz. And for people who are, for people who are thinking about entering competition, it might be a case of, actually, I think I can do that as well.
Yes, definitely.
To be able, it's a hard balance to get because they don't want to put people off, but there are certainly I know painters who could try. Their goal could be to win that top 3.
Yes, definitely.
Maybe not in the strongest category at the strongest demon to start with, but over a course of years and years. So yeah, they put on this day. They do entice you up with as a tour around the exhibition centre, which was it's one of those things. We've been up there quite a few times, haven't we? Now, and even with the couple of changes in there, we kind of zoom through the first couple of rooms. Oh, that's a change. We're going to look at that. Oh, that's a change. We're going to look at that. And because
I thought there was going to be more changes. By the time we were speeding through. We were hanging out with Matt Kennedy at this stage, and he sort of said, "Oh, do you fancy just going for a drink in Bugman's rather than spending?" Because we only had, I think, about 45 minutes, was it, to walk around
just under an hour,
under the exhibition. So he sort of said, "Oh, do you fancy going and getting a drink?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then I sort of said, "Oh, look, we're just going to whiz through." I said, "Well, I'll just look at the bits that I haven't seen before," and I struggled to find the bits that I hadn't seen. Everything I looked at, I went, "Yep, seen that before. And it was a very quick whirlwind tour of the exhibition hall.
Yeah, also it was the first thing, so you're still meeting the people who are arriving. And in fact, as we were leaving that, Nathaniel Joseph turned up. That's his name, isn't it? Yeah. And, kind of directed him where to go. People were still turning up because traffic and whatever. So actually you're still on that kind of buzz of, all right, mate, I haven't seen you in a while, and chatting. Yeah, we took the opportunity to go and get a hot chocolate and sit outside and have a chat. But what is good is because your models are on show, you've now got access for free. What I presume that's the period of time while your models are on show.
Yes, pretty much. They used to say that if you came up again at some point, you could speak to the organisers and say, "Oh, well, look, can you let me in?" And they just sort of get you in because your models are in there. But now they give you a little ticket to say, entry between these dates.
Yeah. You
plus one other, which is quite cool. If you're ever going to go up there again, it's nice to have that in your back pocket and say, "Come on, let's go and have a walk round."
And absolutely, you've got a family member that's come over or whatever, you want to show off that your model's in there. It doesn't cost GW anything to do that, and it's a nice touch for all the winners to get as well. I mean, you particularly think the young bloods. There was a couple of young guys there. One of them, I know his dad played Warhammer with his dad, and if he's down there with another family member near Nottingham, he can say, "Come and look at my stuff." I mean, how awesome is that for
it's pretty cool.
15-year-old kid or however old he is. It's pretty awesome. And if you ever go there with his schoolmates, oh, by the way, that's not matter. It's cool enough they're getting White Dwarf, but to be able to go and see it amongst GW stuff, amongst other Golden Demon winners, really good. And they had something else which we won't talk about because it's going to happen and will all become, down the line, people will hear about it all and it will be awesome. But they also did a few seminars.
Yes, they did.
We'll get the lunch out of the way. They provided a buffet lunch, which was, I was kind of hoping for a proper meal, but a buffet lunch, filled you up.
It wasn't great.
It wasn't great. It was a bit beige.
It was. In previous years, we were all taken to the canteen and given free rein to have what we wanted, which is that was always the best bit for me. But they did say this year, with everyone bringing plus ones with the extra demons. I think how many people did Lies say there were? There was it?
Oh, I don't know.
60 or 70 people, something along those lines.
Four Golden Demon things with 4 or 5 categories.
It was
3 or 4.
It was a number where
she
basically said, like, with that sort of number of people, the fact it being lunchtime and they have staff going in the canteen, it would just overwhelm the canteen.
And they provided enough food, and it was okay. It wasn't terrible by any stretch of the imagination, but it wasn't. I've eaten in the canteen at events before, and I was kind of looking forward to that. But such is life. That's a logistical thing. I can't see that changing. Hopefully, maybe the slightly better options on the catering, but that's a minor gripe. But the main kind of aspect of the day were these seminars.
Yes.
And question and answers. So First one we had was, and the one I kind of wrote the most on, was the judges' question and answers. Now, so this was Darren Latham,
Yep.
Max, and Joe. I can't remember
Yes.
their surnames, and I will probably butcher them anyway. I should have looked them up. I do apologise. And they basically, these are the guys who judge Golden Demon amongst others, and they gave their knowledge, what they're looking for, and just imparted some wisdom on how to improve your Golden Demon winning models. Now, it was humorous for me because I felt that all the +1s and maybe the Youngbloods got way more out of this than any of the people who actually won a Golden Demon, because it felt very much like I'm telling people who've won a medal how to win a medal.
Yes, yeah, it is always a bit of a weird one, because they sort of do that every year. They say lunch with the judges, and you can speak to them about how they judge Golden Demon. And we're very much in the circuit, so to speak. We're all very much clued up on what the rules are, how they look at things, all these aspects of it.
Yeah, and anyone who's been there, and as I say, people winning their first one, they will get more out of it. But also, once you've been on the scene, once you've been doing that, you become used to these guys, not friends, but become acquainted with these people enough to the point where you can say, so my model that I've entered here, why didn't it win? Or what can I improve on? And you almost do that one-to-one. And pretty much everyone said the same thing. It's like when we look for one-to-one. Some people said, I was going to ask a question, but I don't want my competitors to know the question I was going to ask.
Yeah.
So I waited because, your competition, some of you are real competition bunnies. And that's cool. So it was interesting. It was something I felt that would be great to have wider access to, maybe a Warhammer community article, video, something like that, where they really just lay it out well.
Yeah, like a bit like how they've done those, those like inside the studio, those sort of things.
Yeah.
Have them on again and just go through it all, but go through it all with it, in that detail again. Because again, it was really useful information, but probably slightly wasted on the audience.
Yeah, I mean, I've written very scribbled 4 pages in my notebook, just key things that I heard that I was like, okay, cool, I'll write these down. And again, I'm not in the painting circle, but having chatted to you, having been in the hobby a long time, having just paid attention, most of these are known. A lot of them are common sense, but sometimes when you're in the heat of trying to do things, that doesn't always follow through. So, but things like, they were picking out, and this is obviously things where they feel they see regularly enough that people do. Yeah, consistency across the whole piece. I mean, we might as well talk about this within this section, I think, because this is about the Golden Demon winners. So, I assume you do these almost kind of subconsciously.
Yeah, for me, I think I'm a perfectionist, so I'm looking at every part of the model and making it as good as it can be. So what they were alluding to is don't if you're really good at painting cloaks, paint the cloak brilliantly, then not do as much effort in the rest of the model because it will show up.
Yeah.
And for me, that's an obvious, but obviously for some people they may lose their focus when they get to other parts of the model and maybe do a bit of a slapdash job, and that could really hurt them.
Yeah. They may forget.
Competition-wise.
Yeah, they may forget about a part of a model almost.
That can happen. That can easily happen.
They will look at every part of the model. They will turn it around 360. So if you've got a model and you want it displayed a certain way, well, they're still going to turn the model round and have a look at the back of it. And if you've not put the same quality of effort into the back as the front, then you're not going to get an award. And that goes for all the bits that you think you might be able to get away with because they're in crevices and whatever. Well, these guys are looking for that consistency and perfection across the whole model.
Yes. Yeah, completely.
Yeah, and that includes assembly. Yep. I think Darren pointed it, said, there's nothing worse than seeing a really wonderful paint job, and as you work your way around the model, you notice there's a big mould line that they haven't quite got at. and again, that fits that perfection. You've got to treat the assembly of the model, the clean up and assembly of the model, as part of the process. And he explained it quite well. If it takes an hour to assemble, your single miniature that you're entering into a single miniature category, and then you're going to spend 40 hours painting it, what's the hour?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, and actually, sometimes it's those little statements that stick in your mind. Well, take that extra time, make sure it's smooth. Make sure
I have a similar thing with bases, and I often get lost in not thinking about a base, especially sometimes I'll dive into getting the model painted before I've worked the base out, and then have arduous times trying to fit the model to the base that I've then designed and trying to dry fit it and stuff. And it's that whole don't dive into it too quickly.
Yeah,
that's a classic case. If it takes an extra hour, let it take that extra hour.
Yeah, he also pointed out that they've rejected, from winning, many models for having gaps under the feet because they haven't planned their base properly. Yeah, and that foot's hovering a little bit.
I've done it loads of times with Ferrous Manus. I stuck him to my base. I had a hovery foot, and I started wedging bits of slate underneath the foot to sort of bridge the gap.
Yeah, absolutely. And also within that assembly, it's composition. So not only because the main thing they're looking for, one of the main things they're looking for is a theme. This has got to be Warhammer, whether it's 40k, whether it's Heresy, whether it's Age of Sigmar, Blood Bowl. It's got to be a Games Workshop, rooted in Games Workshop stuff, as well as well painted. And if your composition doesn't create a model that seems to work well, whether that's because the model itself looks a bit off or because it's not fitting into that, then again, essentially it's avoiding those things which will almost automatically get you pushed out of an opportunity.
Yes.
Which is really cool. And even conversions. I think the term was make them look like it's a box set. It's just come off the sprue. Yeah. And if you're going to convert, it needs to be to the point, I've not seen that model before. So, and I think that's what puts a lot of people off from maybe even trying to start to learn. But, who knows? There was some nice piece about trends. We've talked, I think we've even talked on the podcast about, object source lighting came in, and then people are talking about using textures within the painting surface a lot more as well. Because everyone's doing it doesn't mean you have to follow the trend. The trend will not win you a demon by itself.
Yes, yeah. And I think I've alluded to this before as well in certain results of demons where someone will do a particular style because it's the in style, but if they don't execute it perfectly, someone could do a different style, execute it perfectly, and they're going to pick that out as a better entry because they'll say, he's tried to do non-metallic metals, but he hasn't quite got it right, but we're going to pick this one that's normal metallics because it's done way better. It's been done to perfection.
They did point out one thing, and it covers for quite a few of the subjects, is if you do use a technique that no one else really has, then, and this went for models as well, because someone asked, am I less likely to win with an older model? And well, no, but if you're used to a certain model, then your eye tends to drift over it a little bit quicker than it would if it's something new, stands out. So if you've got a technique that you can nail and it's not been seen before, then that's, again, just maybe going to catch the eye a little bit. And this is where they pulled out David Soper a number of times. They were like, he did this first, and then people copied him. And he did this, and then people trailed after him. And while it's the only one there, it's gonna have much more of an effect. And not everyone can do that. That's absolutely. And just because you've got a new technique, that doesn't mean you're necessarily going to win either. So
it made me chuckle when they were mentioning the techniques, and then certain people got looks. So they mentioned about covering a model in lots of freehand, and Richard Gray got looked at. And they mentioned about non-metallic metals, and I swear I got looked at. And it's almost a case of, these are trends, but they're not necessary. But it's we've each got our own style, and we each lend ourselves to that, and we know where we're strong. We know what we're good at, and that's probably why we do achieve in Golden Demons, because we know we can do that and we can do it well, and we don't try and reinvent the wheel each time that we paint a model. Yeah,
absolutely. In any art, people have styles. We look at fine art, and people who are into fine art can identify who painted a piece by the style it was painted in.
Yeah,
it happens. There's no difference in that. We are naturally moved towards a certain way of doing things. And in fact, you talked there about you do non-metallic metals because you're good at non-metallic metals, and that was one thing they picked up. When you're doing a competition entry, you play to your strengths. So you might pick a model that has got overlapping plates of armour down a leg, because you know that you can highlight each one and bring it up to that perfect shine, and maybe you're not as good at, say, skin. So you take the more armoured model. Now, doesn't mean that in the in-betweens you don't go and practice how to paint skin, but when it comes to winning a competition, do you want to try out something you're not sure of? Do you want to go and play your sport and try those tricks that you haven't even practiced yet? You're just going to feel like you're going to look an idiot at some point, unless you're very, very talented and can just do it anyway. But you stick to your strengths for the competition and work on your weaknesses outside of that competition.
Yeah, completely. But it was, like you said, a lot of it just sort of, it was quite a lot of common sense, wasn't it? So I think if you're painting for competition, if you were painting and you thought, I'm just going to try something completely off the wall and something I've never tried before, your odds of winning are massively reduced to what you're good at.
And that's blind luck that you happen to be good at what you're trying.
Yes.
And that can happen. Yeah, and as you say, a lot of it is common sense. Some interesting bits about the categories. There were people entering categories with like the barest, but like squad size is 3+, so they'd enter 3 Gretching again, or Grots. We're talking about making it feel like Warhammer. So if you've got small models in a unit category, you're probably going to need 10 models, or if they're larger models, 5, or if they're big models, 3. Make it feel like you could see that unit either on the table or in a novel, that you could actually feel them as part of that thing, because that is a real strength. And this is, we spoke at the Heresy Weekend of some of the models might not have got picked up, and I think this might be a reason why they didn't scream Warhammer.
Yeah.
And if it comes down to very fine margins, then that could be the fine margin that sees you off. You're giving an excuse for them not to pick you. There was a lot of really cool stuff. One was attaching your models to the plinth. Or to the base, Darren was saying every year they pick up models, and some of them aren't attached, and they fall and break, and it's just not a great place to be. So help yourself out, and make sure it's firmly attached, and everything else. I did like this one because I thought of you. Focus on one category before a second entry. Finish a model to your best ability and move on to the next. Now, again, obviously, different people deal with different things in different ways, but it would be, if those 3 models you entered for the Heresy Weekender, if you had left it too late because the way you paint needing a break and you hadn't quite finished all 3 of them, you walk away with nothing.
Yeah, completely.
And you busted your gut getting those 3 ready as it was.
But bear in mind, I wanted to do 4 entries.
Well, there we go. Exactly, yeah. So you bit off more than you can chew already, and then still bit off almost more than you can chew again. And again, if you're taking it down to someone who's not entered so many, then yeah, work on 2. But when you know that you're getting, okay, I need to get something finished, pick one, go with it, and finish it to the best of your ability. And then if the second one gets finished, it gets finished. If not, maybe it waits for another Golden Demon. Maybe it's just a practice piece.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I've had plenty of pieces where I've got one thing done, I've been working on another, and then I've just sort of run out of time, and it's just petered out, and I've stopped it because I knew I wouldn't get it done in the time frame. But I've always wanted to try and do a big sweep, and I sort of did that in the Heresy one. And it is tough though, that whole thing. I found it quite useful to be able to split, to drop between projects, so I kept everything moving. And I didn't sort of stagnate on a particular task or a particular area of a model. But it is dangerous that if you do mismanage your time, you could end up with nothing to take. So, quite scary.
We'll get onto it later, but they've announced the dates for the next 4 demons. So, what you can do now is you can plan to have that backup miniature, which is I've had enough, I need to paint something else. And it could be, the beauty of what you could have now is you can have a 40k miniature where you're doing your non-metallic metals on every plate and blah, blah, blah. And then your I've had enough miniature could be a wood elf, which is flesh and natural tones and something like that. So you are literally moving away from the thing that's like blinding you to something else. And also, that actually that's 3 months down the line. So I can pick it up every now and then. My main project is still my main project, and then every few hours I need to just do a little bit of this, and then you can almost switch in the next project. You can have a rolling thing if that's the way you want to work. And it all comes down to the individual at the end of the day. I'm sure there are people out there who are just like, no, 1 miniature till we're finished, boom, and we'll work 30 hours on it, 40 hours on it. But
and I have done that. I have done things where I just want to get it done, and you work away at it. But I have found that to get the maximum amount of painting time and get the maximum out of each session, you get these periods where you're really in the zone, and if you drop out of that, it's trying to get back in there. But I find the easiest way of getting back in the zone is trying something different, changing it up, different colours, different areas, and multiple projects can do that because you can just switch between things rather than just thinking, oh God, I've got another 2 weeks of painting the same colour.
I think most humans work that way. Most people work that way. Our brains like that. The odd one doesn't. It's nice. It's just the option of getting out of a rut and not getting stuck in that and dragged down by it. As you say, that we've gone over very quickly what they talked about there, and for a lot of listeners of this show, none of that's hugely new. Some of it's maybe couched in a different way, and some of it's maybe like, oh, okay, so that I appreciate more now what they mean. But none of it's new, none of it's revolutionary. It's very common sense. At the end of the day, you're going to have to work hard and you're going to have to paint well. There are, and there are little things you can do to make sure you don't get essentially kind of disqualified. I mean, disqualify is not the right word, but like easily pushed aside. So just make sure you do those simple things and make sure you do them. But what was really interesting was Warhammer Fest. Darren talking about Warhammer Fest. And the quantity of entries left the judges feeling overwhelmed was the term.
Yes.
And this was a case of, currently they put a green sticker by every...
Yeah, currently there's a 2-sticker system, which is green sticker for you've made the finalists, and blue sticker to say that you have been photographed. So they've taken the photograph of your miniature for White Dwarf or whatever they want to use it for in the future. Right, yeah.
And green sticker goes through and then you get finalist pins.
That's right, yeah.
Right. What they were saying is they just ended up with too many models in one category because there's no gradation in that. And the judging table in the centre becomes really cluttered with models to the point where it's a bit blinding and a model could get missed out. So what they're going to do is move to a system where they have a green sticker and then a red sticker. So It does a few things. First off, it gives them more space. So the red sticker is judges' table. So these are green stickers are finalists, reds are in contention to win. And
yes.
this does a couple of things. First off, any red sticker model is going to get a certificate. It's going to get photoed, definitely get photoed, and it's going to be in a chance to win. So it means that they've got a handful, 5, 6, 10 models on a table rather than 30. Which means they can spend more time on the models that need that much more judging, because some of it's quite difficult. And it means the top judges can focus more on that as well, so it can be filtered to them.
Yes, so they're talking about basically doing a cut of the finalists, which in some ways, in my eyes, what this does enable you to do is have a greater idea of where you've come in the pecking order.
Yeah.
Because in my eyes, it's very easy to hit that finalist pin level, but it's a whole nother thing to place.
Yeah.
And you could be stabbing away at it. You could be getting fourth every single time you enter, but you may not feel as though you're getting fourth because you are judged the same as the person that scraped through getting a finalist pin. Absolutely. And there sometimes is a lot of them as well.
Yeah, and that's the second major point. So without approaching the judges and asking for feedback, you have no concept of where you stand in the grand scheme of things. You can have an idea what your friends might say and everything else, but unfortunately that doesn't necessarily mean a lot. And these judges get a lot of people after them, and some people don't like to approach that kind of thing. Maybe they're worried about what they'll say, things like that. So it's a much better system. Now, within those things, you can still approach a judge and say, what do I need to do? But at least if you've got a green sticker, what do I need to do to step up to the red sticker to get on the final judging table? It doesn't, again, there's a granularity there. Okay, I'm new. I want to get a green sticker. That's my aim. Brilliant. Okay, I've got a green sticker. What's next? I'll get a red sticker. Awesome. Because you might not think you can reach the golden demon. So it all does encourage people, and that's a really good system. Really good system. And the fact you get a certificate for that as well means you're getting recognised for doing that, and a guaranteed photo as well means they're definitely photoing the best models at the event.
Yes, and I think my only thing that I'm concerned about is when they judge that red sticker, because I've seen it where things can get easily missed in the cabinets. So you would want to know that they've had a good look under a different light of the models that they're going to judge for that red sticker. Yeah.
And that's always,
I'm sure they'll work that out and work out which way they're going to do it.
It's always a problem that something can get missed. The way I see it potentially happening is like you've almost got the guys go around immediately looking for the green sticker quality stuff, and that can be a set of guys doing that. And then every time they see something for a red sticker, they can then highlight or they can highlight at any point to the judges who are going to make that final decision that, here you go, guys, these are ready, so at the top level, they've got a much narrower field of view, and you're controlling what goes through to them. Yeah, there's always going to be a problem with models potentially getting missed. Unfortunately, there's not a lot I don't think you can do about that, besides having more time and a much better lighting setup. But it does give them the judges more time on those models. In fact, they did say 6 to 8 models would be getting the red thing. So the top 6 to 8 they'll be ideally looking at. Obviously, that's a rough guideline. They did, they were very quick to point out this is a process that happens anyway. Yeah, when they get all those finalist models on a table, Darren was saying, you almost don't want to say it, but you push the ones to the side because most people have seen an X Factor or whatever. Okay, you're all finalists, but really, you were only put through if we didn't get much better. And that's not to demean those people, but you're good. These are great. Yeah. So they push all the good ones to the side. They're just getting rid of that stage in a more formal manner and in a way that people can see what's going on.
and you get the feedback from that, knowing where you sat within the skip. So that's the biggest thing for me is if you're getting those red stickers, virtually every time you enter, you're not very far off the pace for placing. Yeah,
and that's where you then want to go and say, what do I need to do? And whether that's the judges, other painters, you can ask a lot of people. So, but the judges are good. They're good at answering these questions, and they'll point out, and they'll do it critically. So you have to be aware that you might not like what they say, but they're not mean with it. They will point out what they were looking for and where they think you fell short of that mark. So you have to be prepared for that as well.
Yeah, you've got to be able to take it on the chin.
Yeah. And they did mention, we actually had the Warhammer community release for the dates, didn't we? For
yes.
40k in November, Age of Sigmar early 2018, Horus Heresy will be at Warhammer Fest again, and the Classic will be at Warhammer Fest. Sorry, Heresy will be at the weekend, and the Classic will Warhammer Fest in the summer.
There was that brief moment where I thought they weren't going to do a Heresy Golden Demon. Because they've said, it'll be a 40k one in November, we'll be doing a Sigmar one in March, and I went, they've skipped past February, oh no! And then I think they even mentioned the Warhammer Fest one, and they said, and a Heresy one.
I think Tony is still very keen to have it at the Weekender, from what I gather, just from hearing bits. Again, there's no solid information on that.
Well, I love it, so I hope they have it.
I'm still a bit up in the air about it. I think it does provide a slight, not a schism, but it does provide some people who are not there necessarily for the whole weekender.
Yes, and then people like to downgrade it because they say that it's not open to everyone. Yeah,
so I think there are still a couple of issues there, but I think all the time that they sell out the weekender and people seem to generally like it, will be done. Cool. We had a couple of other kind of Q&As and meets as well. We had the miniatures designers come in. That was actually really interesting. I felt. I don't know how you felt on that.
Yeah, I felt it felt weird when they came in because it felt as though we were being corralled into some sort of recruitment, some sort of... It wasn't so much about, this is what we do, this is how we do it. More of a, we need more miniature designers, and we think you guys would be a great place to start. Who's interested?
This is Matt Toon, is the guy who runs it, as far as I can tell, who's heads up that department. We had Joe, Maxime, and Sam. So there are two Maximes. This is the guy who's done the only thing we've seen of his. He didn't do work on the new box of 40k. He works on the Shadespire Undead models, which are fantastic. And it was very much pretty much from the outset, most of our sculptors are ex-painters. Have you ever thought of becoming a sculptor? And reading between the lines, it was like, is finding sculptors a tough job? Because I could see it being a tough job. I don't know how many sculptors there are out in the world who are good enough to do it full time and want to work in Nottingham, But it was,
I honestly did think that maybe it was a bit of a recruitment drive, because obviously it must be a tough thing to fill when you need more, more sculptors. And I did speak to Joe about this and said, well, if they're saying that it's a job for life, you want to spend the rest of your life sculpting miniatures, and you've got a very, established team. You've got, people in there like Jez Goodwin who have been there virtually forever.
Pretty much.
I was like, well, how many people do you realistically need if people stay in it for? And he's like, well, it's expansion. We are expanding. We need more sculptors.
And it's not just a job for life. We've seen people at Forge World move on to other projects. What's his name went to Veta years ago, and Edgar moved and went back home and did his own stuff. So, and circumstances change. So, they do constantly need people as well. Maxime, I was talking to him, and he was, when he moved over here, he didn't necessarily view it as a job for life, but he said as soon as I got here, it was like, this is great. But yeah, it was really interesting. We won't go into it too much, I don't think.
My favourite comment of the whole day was when he was doing his slideshow, and the first question was, "So you've won a golden demon? What's next?" And the bloke next to me just went, "Crystal brush."
Oh, nasty words, nasty words. Yeah, there was some really interesting parts. Pretty much the whole of GW is going to be, CAD design soon.
Yes, yeah.
The question was asked, and the answer was, "We'll do what's efficient." And what is efficient is designing on a computer. There's no doubt about it at the moment. So Maxime himself was learning how to use all the computer programs they've got that have been designed for them, rather than hand sculpting. So that's
what I found very interesting was when the Matt, it was Matt, wasn't it? Not Max. Was saying, I would, when someone says me a piece of work in, I don't care what format it's in, whether it's like, sculpted or, he said, even if it was made out of a block of cheese, he just wants to see someone's ability. And I thought that was quite interesting, because I thought they may almost take a slightly dimmer view if you sent in something sculpted out of putty. No. Because it would be a case of, we're moving on from there. But I suppose the skills are transferable, aren't they?
Yeah, so. I think Games Workshop themselves, the number one thing you need to work for Games Workshop is passion. Passion and commitment. And if you've got those two, you will find a job in Games Workshop and be happy there. When it comes to sculpting, this is me talking as a non-sculptor, but when you think about it, the reason they like painters, and the couple of guys said, I'm a painter, I stare at arms all the time when I'm painting arms, you get an appreciation for how an arm should be sculpted, you just by working with the thing. If you can sculpt a model that's the right dimensions in clay, then you've got an understanding of the physiology to be able to do that in another form. Yeah. And it's just then a case of teaching you how to use a different piece of equipment to get what's in your head out. Now, you can do it one way. We can teach you how to do it another way.
Yeah, sure.
And that very much is the way of GW across a number of other systems as well. And this is why their job applications are a bit open, and they don't ask, if you're going for an artist job, you're going to have to bring pieces of art. They're going to have to see that you can actually draw. But the style you use, no matter what, they need to know that you have the eye, you have the talent in that aspect, and the willingness and effort and passion to transfer it as they need it. And then they will fit. And sometimes the job fits around the person in that respect as well. So
yeah, I found it quite interesting that some of the sculptors only sculpt certain types of models. And I think, was there an example where they said, was it Seb or someone, they said that apart from Gilliman, once he sculpted Gilliman, that was the first Space Marine he'd ever sculpted, and he'd been working in the studio like 12 years or something.
Did a lot of Eldar, I think.
Yeah, and it was one of those ones where you think, wow, you can, if you have a passion for a particular type or you're good at something, they're not going to say, well, no, I'm sorry, I know you're good at that, but today you are doing this.
If you've got a guy who just makes tanks and makes them the best tanks that anyone's ever seen by, 20% over everyone else, well, keep him making tanks.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and if he enjoys it as well, yeah, because that's part of it. So
yeah, completely. I found that very interesting.
It was very, very interesting, and it's something that I don't think a lot of people think about per se. But also the other thing you're looking at painters is because particularly golden level demon level painters, as they're using green stuff to do stuff, and eventually, essentially, some of the guys they started off using green stuff to fill gaps. Then it became modelling fur. Then it became, well, actually, I need to reposition this arm, and all of a sudden, you're sculpting anyway.
Oh yeah, and it's definitely an easy transition to make because you end up to become good at painting. You sort of end up trying to look at every little advantage you can get, and one of those is, well, if I sculpt that bit myself or make that unique, you think you're going to do better. So it's definitely a transferable skill.
Yeah, and it's one of those things. When you're in the sculpting, you're not just sculpting models. You're working with people who are coming up with concept designs and da-da-da, and sometimes you're influencing them with something you've done, and it works both ways, and you're talking to other people, how do I do this? And, you know, it sounds like a really cool job.
It does. I mean, I must admit, it sounded amazing, but the number one problem with all these jobs is that they're in Nottingham.
And, you know, yeah, there's a lot of things, isn't there? You can only do so much. Some people can't afford to drop the money. You know, if they're on more money than these places would probably pay. And some people, it's just beyond our skill level.
Yes.
Unfortunately, no matter how much you want to do it, I'm not a sculptor. You know, could I be a sculptor with, you know, 1,000 hours practice? Maybe. But that's a long time. Yeah. And the other two kind of things I did were meet the heavy metal painters and army painters from GW.
Yes.
Now, this seems a little bit more interesting in that the army painters particularly, that's not a skill that really fits well with Golden Demon.
It's almost like this is how we paint things quickly and as efficiently as possible versus how we paint things to perfection.
Yeah, and it's, you know, it's not shortcuts per se, but it's the simpler method maybe, you know, to achieve an effect. But it's. I was talking
to I think it's Paul, and I basically was asking him some questions on that the new librarian that he painted for White Dwarf, and I said, look, where does the line sit between army painting and Golden Demon? I said, because your army painted one was very, very close in look and style, and he basically said that their brief is to keep things to the recipes that they state within their paint range. So like no mixing or blending or things like that. It's a case of pot 1, pot 2, pot 3, maximum three pots to a colour, using dry brushing and all the techniques that they would teach you
in Duncan's videos
in a GW to achieve the best look possible, but without that level where the heavy metal take it a bit beyond that with a lot of more.
Yeah, it's the attainable level.
Yeah, that's probably the best way of describing it.
But it just shows you what can be done with just no mixing, simple techniques. You know, I say simple techniques, but simpler techniques.
Yes.
It does show you what can be done when you work hard, you get good at something, and you just use the basic techniques. But yeah, that felt more of a, come and have a chat with them and just, chill out. And the heavy metal painters was a little bit more interactive. I found with the final three, the judges one, obviously a lot of you have done that before. The other three, it was the +1s asking the questions.
There was an embarrassing bit, wasn't there? I think it was in the first sculpting one where he said any questions and everyone was stony silent. And then I saw your hand go up and I went, good old Greg. He's always got something to say. Doesn't matter where he is.
Sometimes. I try and fill a void if it's awkward. But actually, there were some really good questions there. And it looked like, actually, you know what? Some people picked up those flyers. Maybe not for them, maybe for other people. But there's certainly there were questions asked. I was like, actually, that's quite interesting. Talking about how to get into it, as a youngster was one of the good ones. And it, just do it. Just practice. Do what you love it, and do it. And that goes for painting as well. If you want to get better at painting, you've got to paint, haven't you?
Yes, yeah, that is true. I mean, I thought that was obviously, it was quite funny because I remember him saying, well, what do you want to do? You want to be a sculptor, how do you start? Well, sculpt a model. And then now sculpt another model. And it was very much, it sounds obvious, but even I thought, well, how do you get into that? How do you start it? Of course, it is just like, well, sit down and do it.
Yeah,
and then learn from those mistakes.
Yeah, and sometimes it isn't, but sometimes it is literally, well, what do you want to do? I want to do this. Well, at some point you're going to have to sculpt a model. So start now. Again, sometimes it'll be, well, I've sculpted an arm for this dude, and you can break it down. But he's quite right in that, sculpt it again. They say it takes 1,000 hours of practice to become an expert. It's 10,000 hours to become an expert. So these people who work for GW, they haven't just turned up with the first model they've ever tried. They've scrapped a few and sworn a few times as they've gone along. But there are opportunities, and in fact, he said, particularly with the sculptors, it looks like it's a bit different than, Black Library don't just want you sending manuscripts in to be read. Quite, they have submissions guidelines and things. But he said he has people who send him photos of sculpts, and he actually gives critical feedback. But I suppose you have to when it's an environment where your resources in terms of staff, the pool of them is limited compared to other aspects.
Yeah, I suppose in some ways it did almost sound like a bit of a, it did, like I said, it sounded like a recruitment drive.
Oh, I think it was.
So I do honestly think it was a case of, like, where are we going to look to find out our next sculptors? And, that was an opportunity. And, good for him for taking it. And you never know. I heard some whispers that there was a Golden Demon painter there that does a lot of sculpting, and he was considering it. So, if he does become a sculptor off the back of it, then it's worked.
It's an hour out of his day on a Friday, and he's had it on a podcast now. And,
yeah, exactly.
And he's had 2 or 3 people who are in that environment who are more likely to become sculptors who've shown an interest. So it's worth GW's time, isn't it? You've got a targeted audience like that. You know how headhunters, they go and find people. He's gone, well, where are the people we look at who probably got the skills? Well, there's 40 of them right there. Well, let's go and ask them. So, and that was pretty much it. He had the presentation of it wasn't really a presentation. It was, here are your little plaques and your bits and pieces and your goodie bag.
Goodie bag? Yeah, first year of a goodie bag.
Yeah, very small goodie bag. It's just a couple of things in there. Warhammer World exclusives, which were quite cool.
Well, you can't complain at that. I've probably never used that Bugman model, but it was nice to be given one.
That's cool, isn't it? Again, it doesn't cost them a huge amount to do that, and it's just a nice touch. And that was the day. So, as an outsider, I was like, I'm really glad I went to one. If I was just to travel up just to do it again, I don't know if I would as a +1. Unless, someone at my club maybe won something and was literally like, I don't want to go up there by myself, then maybe I'd jump in with them. But, next time I
think for the key thing would be if it changed enough to warrant you going up again, because it would have to substantially change, wouldn't it, to you think, I fancy going up to seeing that again.
There would have to be something organised that was enough of a draw. And I pay for going through the Warhammer, the display once or twice a year anyway. So that's not really enough of a draw. It would have to be something like, I don't know. There was talk of having Warhammer TV interviews with you guys and then maybe going up later on. Something like that where it was a little bit expanded beyond essentially I could have gone up there and on an open day I could have had most of those conversations I've had there. So, at Warhammer Fest, in theory, you could have found out all that information.
Oh,
from
yes,
the same people.
Yeah.
And the open days, to a slightly lesser extent, you could do the same. So, in terms of that, what you guys got, and because some people will view it as, oh, look, they've won stuff, they've got stuff, as part of that elitism thing. Well, all that information that was put out, if you want to get up and go to a Forge World Open Day, a 40k Open Day, the New Year's Open Day, any of the events they put on, and you actually put some effort in to go and approach, find out, okay, who's Tom Walton? Okay, he's that guy. I know he's painted that model. I want to know how he's done this. I want a little bit. And you go and ask him those questions in a nice manner, you will find out that information. So nothing there was super secret for Golden Demon winners only. It just happens to be that they need to encourage you guys to go up.
Yes. Yeah, like you said, that's pretty much the reason they get us up there, is because they want to do a display of the models.
Now, the one thing you could do is arrange it with a Saturday game. So maybe go up there on the Friday, do some gaming on the Friday evening, straight afterwards, stay over, and then have a big game. I could see that being something that if you had enough friends going, you could do. And works into that. But as a day in itself, I'm cool. I'm sure you'll go up because it's, you want your model shown off, don't you? especially when you win the sword. You want it there, front and centre, and to do that. So, and as I say, there was one other thing which we're not going to talk about, but will become apparent later on, which is another. So I don't want to talk about it too much, but it's another incentive to get involved.
Yes,
because there's a little bit of friendly competition, a friendly kind of it's a way of getting a little bit more recognition in that respect. And we won't go any deeper than that, but months down the line you will find out about it in White Dwarf and what have you, which is really cool. And that may be the thing that may be the edge that some guys need to go and drop their model off. Yes,
I think it might be,
Yeah,
it might well be.
I don't know how much they want us to talk about that. They certainly don't. It's a very it's something that they've asked you guys not to talk about, and who knows how it's going to go.
Ah, they didn't ask you, did they?
No, they it's and you can tell by the way I'm talking. They've asked. It's a project that they're doing for White Dwarf. I say a few months down the line, I'm not going to ask Neil anything about it because if he takes part in it, then he's asked not to. Honestly, I don't think they want me spilling the guts on it as well, although they didn't ask me to say anything. I haven't signed anything. But I don't want to ruin that surprise because actually I'm really excited to see what these guys do. And it's another little kind of like, okay, we've got these guys here, let's play on that, as it were. And that's nice and vague and probably means nothing to anyone.
It was high-stakes strip poker.
It was, yeah, indeed. And we all lost because Neil got naked. So
yes, everyone's a loser.
There we go. Okay, so that was the day. Have you got anything else to add on that one, Neil, before we...
Not really, no. It was enjoyable. I would say it's better. The only thing I would say is it was discernibly better than previous years. I think the bigger group of people and the plus ones made it a lot more interesting.
Sure.
Because in previous years, it could have been like 15 people sitting in a dark room. And you could have a little chat with people, but that gets boring very quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair enough. Awesome stuff. Okay, we'll go and hit the music and we'll come back and have Gav Thorpe on. We get to welcome Mr. Gav Thorpe, or should I say Gemmell Award-winning Mr. Gav Thorpe to the show.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, congratulations on that. That must have been a really good evening.
That was great. Yeah, it was unexpected. I wasn't, going into that evening, I wasn't expecting to win, I have to say. It was really good to make the shortlist. I was very pleased with that. So to actually get the axe was, really chuffed.
Yeah, I can imagine that's quite a tough category. I didn't get to look at it a lot, actually. It kind of passed me by. I saw little references to it and never got round to it. I'm sure that's fairly hotly contended.
Yeah, well, you've got names like sort of Brandon Sanderson on there and things.
Yeah, I've heard he's quite good.
Popular authors, it's...
yeah.
And particularly because, certainly at the time, Age of Sigmar was still finding its feet, really. Obviously, this year it's a bit more established now. But, so I was very pleased with that.
No, excellent. Congratulations. So, most of us will know your name and your face, certainly. I've been in the hobby a fair while, so I remember Gav Thorpe version 1, as we could call it. So, do you want to tell us just a little bit about your history with Games Workshop?
I joined Games Workshop in 1993. The tender age of 19 as an assistant games developer. And then as part of that, so that was a 2-year contract, as part of that I did some work on White Dwarf as production and staff writer and things, and that's really when I suppose most people would have come across my name. We did the Citadel Journal before then, but that was quite niche of a niche sort of thing, so that was us cutting our teeth. Mm-hmm. So on White Dwarf, my face got shoved in front of people a lot more. And then after that, went back to games development, where I then spent next 12 years, 11 years or so, writing codexes and army books and games, really. So during which I did some work on 40k codexes and helped work particularly on 40k 3rd edition. Then I became Warhammer Lore Master, so I was in charge of the Warhammer game system, so the development of that, overseeing the team and things. And then for a while I was lead background designer, which was both 40k and Warhammer.
Blimey.
Which was, it was looking at how we developed the background, how it was presented in the books and things like that. That's when we had what was called the key design team. And then that got folded back into the relevant departments, and I went back to games design for the last couple of years. So I was there 14 years in total, and I left, so I left 9 years ago, just over 9 years ago. I went freelance full time because in 1997 Games Workshop launched Black Library, and I was in the useful position of having a desk, 10 feet away from Andy Jones, who was the guy who was setting it up initially, and I was asked if I wanted to write some short stories for their first publication, which was the Inferno magazine. So it's in Inferno issue 2, had my first short story, Birth of a Legend. And then it kind of went on from there. So I did the Last Chances, got Last Chances novels. So I was designing games during the day and sort of evening and weekends writing for the Black Library. Then 9 years ago I sort of swapped it really. I did doing the fiction as the day job and a bit of games design for fun and a little bit of profit in my spare time. So,
sure.
That's kind of where we're at now.
Yeah, I certainly was. And Fanatic was the first magazine that I tried to make sure I picked up on the day it was released. I was a specialist games like Monkey and all the extra bits and pieces back in the day, which dates me a little bit as well.
Well, that was sort of was a little bit of what we kind of did with the journal originally. We had 40k articles and things, but also sort of Man of War and other bits that didn't really appear in White Dwarf. But then, with Fanatic, I suppose my biggest connection really was with the Inquisitor game, which I did in 2000, and then obviously it became a specialist game, and Andy Hall in particular was responsible for carrying that on with a little bit of assistance and oversight from me. So it was, and now of course we've got a whole specialist games division again.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant.
Part of Forge World. So everything old is new again, and everything new is old again. But that's a really good one. That's the one we like going back to. Yeah, in those specialist games again.
And not only that, but we've also got like the Horisian Wars and Carrion Throne coming out, that are delving into the style of books that we used to see and building on a lot of that information that was in that Inquisitor book as well.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I had some good conversations with John French about that. We sort of sat down and had a lunch. He asked me a few questions, and I just talked to him for a while. And and that was good. Actually, I'm really pleased with. I mean, he's got his head around the Inquisition in a really good way. I didn't really have to tell him very much because his head was there already. Sure. I think he was looking more just for a bit of encouragement and knowing that it was going in the right direction, really. Yeah,
it's because it's quite an interesting thing as a gamer, as a fan of the company as a whole. Looking in, I remember Gav the rules guy. And in the games and stuff, and obviously when you take a step back, as you said, you were the Warhammer Lore Master. That's something I didn't actually know. And all those roles, we tend to think of Gav as you wrote these rules, you wrote these codexes, you wrote these books. But I suppose over the years that was quite a time where things were codified a lot more. Would that be right, or brought into line?
I think so. Yeah, there's various. Things go they're cyclic, but also sort of go through phases. And so with, I mean, people tend to think of stuff almost in terms of editions, but I think, I took over Warhammer just after 6th edition had been launched, so that had been sort of steered through by Thomas Piernan, with Rick Priestley doing obviously his role as grandfather of Warhammer, but Thomas had been sort of like hands-on developing the thing, and it sort of sketched out, I suppose, the start of the Army books really, but it was very much in progress really when Thomas left to go and work in video games, and so I sort of took over, was handed the baby really in many respects, and a few of his notes of like, make more books, and kind of took over from there. So, which was really nice actually. I mean, I've done up till then, I'd pretty much done mostly 40k actually, or 40k related stuff. So although we obviously worked on all sorts of different games, and like I say, particularly with third edition, my association and most of my work had been on 40k. But actually, I would say before I worked for Games Workshop, I mean, I played lots of Epic. Really.
Right, yeah.
Titan, Depths of Titanicus is what kind of got me into GW games, although I was sort of aware of 40k and played a bit of 40k. What I really played was Space Marine and Depths of Titanicus. That's what I probably collected armies for first. But then of Warhammer and 40k, I probably actually played more Warhammer as a hobbyist until I joined GW, and then I played a lot more 40k. So it's just kind of the way things went, really. But then I ended up back on Warhammer, which was really nice, and cool. I got to work with some great guys, creating some really fun stuff like Ogre Kingdoms and redesigning the Bretonnians and the Wood Elves and obviously getting to work on Dwarfs, my favourite Warhammer race and stuff like that. So, it's I mean, when you spend a long time at a company, especially one like Games Workshop, which is always looking to get people into different roles and move people around, and you get to do lots of different stuff, really. But always in and around games design, really.
Sure. And is your knowledge of the setting is grown up just by doing those jobs, as it were, just by reading the codexes, having an understanding to be able to write those and things like that? Is that you've just accumulated the knowledge as you go through, or were there times when you had a little bit more like structured kind of learning?
There were times when, because again, it was working with, being able to work with Rick Priestley, Alan Merritt, and John Blanche in particular, sort of like
that's three big
well-known luminaries of Warhammer and 40k, and so although we wouldn't necessarily be able to get a written brief out of them, we'd have a conversation at the start of a project about how they saw something, and kind of you get a bit of an insight into what some of their thinking was, and it changed, over the time as well. It might get a little insight into what was happening with Space Wolves when they first done, but how maybe the background could be a bit more nuanced, or a bit how their thinking on it had evolved over the years, or whatever it might be, and then it was up to us to kind of execute some of that, and then bring our own ideas to it. That was always the balancing act, of course. If you're creative and you want to work on stuff, then it's somebody else's IP that you're working on, but you also want to make your mark. And it's the same for the authors of the Black Library as well. So it's finding those places where you can explore and add your own stuff without sort of, I suppose, without not even invalidating, but disrespecting what's gone before, I suppose. Sure. It's almost, you have to be aware of it, and the effort that's gone into it over many, 3 decades now, of continual development and change. So it's always hard, although I spent all that time working on these settings and stuff, stuff's still changing. The basics are the same, the themes are the same, and the general imagery and things, but I still have to make sure I've got a copy of the latest Codex Eldar if I'm going to write about Eldar, just to make sure I get all the little references, or and then they can just go and do stuff like introduce Primaris Marines or whatever, and I've got to learn all of that. So as it goes on, what I know becomes less and less, relatively speaking. But being, I suppose, it's not the detail, because you can look that up, but it's the sense of everything and how it's not supposed to work, but how the themes are supposed to build, and kind of what the influences are, what the inspirations were, that sort of thing. That really helps then, because you can go to the source material and kind of dig out new stuff for yourself. Okay,
yeah, that's really cool, because obviously you mentioned the Eldar. The other thing you're known for is your Dark Angels, and you're friends with Bill King, quite good friends. If the Black Library weekend pitch factor is anything to go by.
Yeah, that was fun. Yeah, well, again, he's another Dwarfs fan, really. That's where the pitch factor thing came in with cameras. Yeah, I mean, I joined DW not long, I don't think, after Bill had left, so I'd never actually got to work with him directly.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I've bumped into him at games days and events and things like that, and we've always got on, and and he's very much. He's one again. He's one of the names that you mentioned up there with Rick and Andy Chambers and Jez Goodwin and people that created my childhood. You know, the Eldar background was sort of like one set of people, but then I look at the Warhammer background, which Bill, you know, the undead background that he wrote, and the High Elves and the Sundering and all this sort of stuff. A lot of the original Horus Heresy material, you know, story was Bill's. So he's had a huge influence on Warhammer, which I think sometimes gets taken for granted, but actually that tone of it was very much established by his writing, particularly in the army books, the early army books of 4th edition.
Sure. Yeah, I think Bill's one of those, from reading what he's written, it was written, you know, a fair amount of time ago now, and things have slightly adapted as we've moved through, but they've, as you say, that keeping to the feel of what he's written. I mean, the way the Space Wolves are written now are very different from Ragnar's Space Wolves from the Bill series, which I love. I think absolutely brilliant. And I suppose some of your early Dark Angel stuff as well. You know, it feels like the same universe, but there are subtle differences that make it stand apart. Would you say that? Yeah.
Yeah, like I say, things sort of change. So essentially, although, you know, what makes the Dark Angels them hasn't fundamentally changed. You know, they've got a big secret, and they're basically, their thing is that they've got this sort of spiritual flaw at the heart of the chapter, rather than a physical flaw like the Dark Angels. That what that means and how far that goes gets sort of altered over time. But also part of the character comes from the troop types, for instance. So when I started the Legacy of Caliban series with Ravenwing, it was to go with I think it was the 6th edition Dark Angels. I'll lose track of edition. I think it was 6th edition. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that was introduced then, and particularly a lot of sort of like warp tech, kind of ancient Dark Age technologies from the heart of the rock and things like that. So although that's quite a practical thing, it's like new troop types to kind of include in your fight scenes and stuff, but it also actually adds something to the character of the chapter, so that you go, and at the same time we had, particularly we had Alan Bly at Forge World, was starting to do tinkering around with ideas of sort of the pre-heresy angels and this idea of the hexagrammaton and the 6 hosts of the angels of the Emperor sort of thing. So again, I was able to draw on some of that and not necessarily explicitly reference it, but it just coloured and influenced a little bit of my thinking and the way I wanted to portray them. So, and then later on, which we'll talk about later, you know, really go to town with that a bit more in things like Angels of Caliban. So that's the sort of thing, I suppose, that gets fleshed out.
Yeah.
The way I've been explaining it lately, particularly with a lot of the very new stuff like Primaris Marines and Gilliman coming back and all that sort of stuff, and people seem to be quite intimidated by it. But actually, the 40k universe doesn't change very much. It looks like it has, but actually what tends to happen, especially over the last 15, 20 years, is it expands.
Yeah.
Most of the stuff that was there is still there. It's just that there's been lots more added to it. So it feels like it's a different place. But actually, Space Marines are still Space Marines. Eldar are still Eldar. You know, Orcs are still Orcs. They're just what that means and what they've got and the stories behind them have just expanded over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. And with all the different timescales that are being looked at, things like Beast Arises and all that, there's a huge amount of scope for all those things to change and adapt and to be able to write a slightly different style that suits the time that it's setting.
Yes, yeah, that's right. And it's kind of always been, I suppose, intimated that there was references like, you know, things like the Macarian Crusades at the start of the 41st millennium, and it was a time of sort of rebirth and growth, very different to the end of the 41st millennium sort of thing. Or, like I say, periods of upheaval and strife that we don't even know about yet. So being able to explore those through Black Library, I think, particularly is a lot of fun, because you can, just like the Heresy and like I say Beast Arises, you can use it in a way to examine the current, you know, Imperium and 41st millennium, because you can see what's changed, because it's easy to assume that's kind of how it always was.
Yeah.
But one of the one of the first, when I went back to games development after White Dwarf, the very first project I worked on was the first Codex Sisters of Battle, which was really fleshing out an area of the background then which hadn't been. And that was the same thing of sort of like being able to look at the Age of Apostasy and these things that were kind of dropped out as hints in the background. And that really sort of, doing that work is what made me really fall in love with the 40k background, I think, and the scale of it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great time again, getting all this stuff as a reader, as a fan. So we are a heresy podcast. We should probably move on to a more heresy focused, kind of set of questions. We had John and Aaron on a little while ago, and I love the fact that whenever Aaron's asked a difficult question, he usually references you in a Horus Heresy meeting at some point. Were you there for the first meeting?
I wasn't there at the start. I think.
Right.
I'm not quite. Well, I think I know why, because I think when they started the Heresy, I think all the original authors were actually non-staff. I was still working at GW then,
right?
And Graham had not long left, so I think he had kind of got in. So they were. I think because it was a new thing, and I think they didn't really want it touching the studio too much. So I don't think they wanted me involved really. Not in a personal way, if you see what I mean. It's just as a basis for a company. They decided that at that time Heresy was Black Library, so. Or they might have the other reasons. They just didn't think, they wouldn't need that many authors or whatever. So
what was your reaction to a Horus Heresy Black Library series?
It was cool. I thought it was intriguing because it was always, the Heresy was always one of those things that we kind of knew would be quite popular in a way because it's Space Marines, and Space Marines are always popular. But it was very firmly, we were told again and again by the likes of Rick and Alan that, there would never be a game, particularly a 28mm game set during the Heresy, probably because it would eclipse all the other sales. I mean, it would,
sure.
If you had a chance of just everyone buying Space Marines and fighting Space Marines, then you wouldn't sell any Orcs or Eldar again, relatively speaking. So it seemed because it came out of the Sabretooth card game as well, and Alan was working on with Sabretooth on some of the background for that and things. I think they were looking at ways that it could exploit the Heresy that didn't impact on the main range of games. So, but I think it was inevitable that we got to where we are now, because once you open that box, people want to play in it. Literally, people want to play in that box. So, and I think the way they handled it was really good. Being able to put it through Forge World, which has already got its own sort of slightly step to one side, means, because Forge World is a part of the veteran offer, it's not something you see in the stores as soon as you walk in and things like that. It becomes easy to keep it slightly compartmentalised. But it was just at the time, it was like, they're doing some books in the Horus Heresy, but then it soon, the whispers were soon kind of like, no, this is going to take off in a big way. Yes. And when they started getting sort of like New York Times bestsellers, you were like, oh, actually, wow, this is like real books,
Yeah.
So not to put down any of the other content, but just it was incredible. And then I got invited in. I think I actually wrote the first thing I wrote for Heresy was Raven's Flight, which is an audio, of how the Raven Guard got off Isfahan, and that was kind of commissioned directly. I hadn't actually been to any meetings before then, and it was one of those. I'd done the Anarin audio. I think that was around about the same time. I can't remember now. They were just starting to do some more audios, and I'd shown an interest, and so they wanted to do a Heresy one. And it was just the question, really. It was sort of like, just how did the Raven Guard get off? How did they escape? It was a big what if in the background. And it was nice and self-contained, and that kind of started it. And just because I kind of slightly picked at that, when I did get invited to the first meeting, and it was clear that I was going to work on one of the novels, it seemed logical just to continue with that. It wasn't a grand plan of like, we'll bring Gav in and he's in the Raven Guard. It was just like I've done a bit already, and I kind of seem to know what's going on with them, and there's a whole load of other stuff going on, and people at the meeting talking about characters. I'd read the books, but I hadn't really absorbed them. I hadn't studied them, so some of the names seemed familiar, but they were talking about storylines and characters, and I'm just like, okay, I've got no idea what anyone's talking about at the moment. So I'm going to try and I'm just going to dig my own little niche over here with some Raven Guarding that doesn't touch the sides too much, and then build up some more understanding of what else is going on.
Sure,
So,
yeah.
and that was the way, really. It was just like a little sort of like tunneling in underneath the background, being able to tell that quite distinct story with some connections to them. And of course, by that point, I'd read Legion, which I really liked. Dan, and Dan at the first meeting had been talking about all these ideas he had of stuff to do with the Alpha Legion and the Drop Site Massacre, and he just had this recurring image of the Alpha Legion stealing the faces of the fallen, of the dead Space Marines, and that kind of was what got fed into a huge part of Deliverance Lost. So, and then suddenly it became part of. It wasn't just this little story that I was working on; it was actually part of the Horus Heresy series, and it kind of made more sense then.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I suppose the advantage being that the whole Raven Guard story, pre that as fans, we knew that they were broken on Isfahan, and that was about it. There's a large story to be told. And did you, were you planning? Was it just the Deliverance Lost book, or did you have ideas beyond that for the whole kind of the tale of Korax and where he ends up?
I think it was a bit of both, really. We hadn't decided exactly what was going to happen. It was only sort of like Deliverance Lost was commissioned, and then chatting. Then I think it was decided. It might have even been before Deliverance Lost actually came out that the Raven Guard story would continue in novella form. It was Soulforge.
Yeah.
The first of the novellas was commissioned. That was how we were going to get the second novel, basically, rather than just release one novel somewhere down the line. Actually, we'll do these kind of more steady instalments of novellas and audios, which will continue the Raven Guard story. So, and I always knew that arc kind of had to continue. That was sort of like, especially where we were at with the Heresy in general, everything was being launched, it was all being set off. Although we'd had the opening trilogy, and Deliverance Lost was the story that brought the Raven Guard into play, and it had to end on a trajectory that had them going somewhere. We didn't necessarily have to know exactly where. We kind of know ultimately how it all ends up, but for Korax's arc, it already kind of suggested to me, I'd already focused quite heavily on Korax in terms of who he was as a personality, because that's just how I like to write, really. I write quite character-focused novels in many ways. So, and he just seemed to be the heart of it, more so even than some of the other Primarchs. His story was the story of the Raven Guard, because so many of them get destroyed. The effect on him is quite profound. So, and that's what we kind of followed through with the novellas.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really enjoyed them. Even the little cliffhanger at the end of the last story, which we won't go into for those who haven't read it. But so you started off with an audio, and you've done. Just having a quick look, you've done a few now for the Horus Heresy. We've got Valerius, 13th Wolf, Raptor, Master of the First, Shadow Masters. Honor to the Dead, yeah, that's the other one I was trying to remember. Is that a medium you really like to work in?
Yeah, I love writing audios. I think, there's two things. One, it just suits my style. I'm kind of quite sparse on my description, and I really like doing dialogue and things. So obviously, audio's right up that street. And also, I like the collaborative side of it, being able to sort of challenge the producer and the sound engineer guys to come up with stuff and push it each time. And I think, and we've kind of wavered between whether they've been, so like Raven's Flight was commissioned as a prose story, a 10,000 word prose story, which then got turned into a script by Black Library. And we're kind of, and there's been times when I've written it as scripts and times when they've wanted it as prose because they're going to be turned into stories. We're back at a place now where they're commissioning as scripts, and I really like that because the format itself just helps you see the story in a slightly different way. Whereas when you're trying to, there's a bit too much of a compromise when you're trying to write it in prose, I think, because they do, you want two different jobs from the narrative voice. But yeah, I mean, and when you get it back, and you can, one of the things you can do is listen to an audio, and it's not just your work. So it's enhanced by what everyone else does. So you can have that as a new experience. And even just back to, Raven's Flight, which was voiced by Toby Longworth, who's obviously done a lot more since then, but just the decision he kind of made with the way he voiced the Raven Guard, and they're a bit more London and a bit more geezer, than maybe I had in mind. But suddenly you go, well, they're all ex-prisoners and descendants of prisoners and stuff, and they are a bit rough and ready actually. And that kind of fed back into my writing because somebody else had actually put that voice. So I actually had that kind of style of talking in my head when I went on to write the rest of the Raven Guard stuff, and that kind of thing is quite entertaining, because that wasn't that came from somewhere else.
Yeah, I suppose that medium highlights that difference. So you hand it over and don't get involved at all with the recording. Don't want to hear them doing it, or do you like to receive it at the end complete?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I don't necessarily have that much time to get involved. Really.
Sure.
I've done one recently, which is the Harlequins audio, which will be coming out at some point, and I was going to go in and see them recording that, and then the timing didn't quite work.
Right.
I just, so I would still really like to go in and kind of just sit in the booth while they're recording at some point, but they know what they're doing. I'm not like, I know that Aaron and John to a certain extent particularly like to write quite a lot of notes about voices or about certain things. So I can get quite specific with sort of certain sound direction things, but the actual, and I maybe make a few notes about the characters, but not necessarily specific. I'm not like them where I think, oh yeah, it's absolutely this character from this film talking or whatever. I just don't think in those same terms. So I'm just happy for them to go with what I've written and then interpret it.
Excellent. And the Titan noises for Honour to the Dead, did they come out as you pictured them or heard them in your head?
Oh yes, definitely. That was one very much that was intended to be an audio story. It was like, well, let's we can do some really cool sound design with Titans, with the war sirens and and the crackle of voice shields and road. What does a Gatling blaster sound like when it goes off or whatever. And that was also, again, part of being able to tell a little bit of a story without getting too involved, because it was Laurie was organising the stuff for Mark of Calf anthology, which was, I think, his first proper solo steered anthology as editor, I think.
Sure.
And so, and again, they were talking about various storylines which I wasn't really up on in my head. I wasn't, and so. Actually, again, being able to just deal with Titans in audio as a little slight step apart from all the interweaving narratives that were going on elsewhere was an easy way to be involved in that without having to spend a few weeks with my head stuck in all of the Calf background and stuff. So, but it was very much just like how awesome would it be to actually hear Titan war sirens,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, it was certainly something different. It was. We've had computer games now for 40k for quite a while, but it's a bit different when it's dedicated to making you experience that story in that environment.
Yeah, I think it's probably it might be the only, but certainly the first crying baby in a Black Library audio as well.
Yes. And in fact, the guy turned up at the Heresy Weekend of that one year with his Titans playing those noises. Out of them, which is awesome as well. So it all feeds into each other.
But that's the thing. Yeah, that's the thing. Is obviously it's a self-contained. We want it to be entertaining stories, but we do have to remember it also springs from the games and stuff that can feed back into the games and inspire people to collect an army or pick a paint scheme or fight a particular battle. That's all part of what we do. We're not just writing books; we're expanding the worlds that people want to explore.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's brilliant for us as fans is we see Black Library influencing Forge World, who influence Black Library, who influence gamers, who and it all that works together in quite a fluid manner, quite a natural kind of process, or appears that way anyway.
Well, I mean, it's slightly trickier. Sometimes it's easier and sometimes it's not quite so easy, depending on, how easy it is to get hold of the information you want or, and sometimes you'll read something, which, particularly bits of background, the difficulty with novels is always taking things that work great on a macro scale and rendering it down into a character story. And once you start getting into detail, lots of particularly the imagery and sort of like the style and themes of stuff become a little bit more tricky. So, because, fundamentally one of the things, certainly in the 41st millennium, one of the key factors is that the Imperium doesn't work. It's not the vagaries of warp travel and the fact that it's this monolithic bureaucracy means that the war engine doesn't work. It doesn't turn up on time. It doesn't do all these sorts of things, which is kind of counter to a lot of the way you might want stuff or the way people perceive stuff to happen. They want it to make sense. They want the rules, as in the setting rules, to work. Well, it's not. It's an image as much as anything.
Yeah.
But once you start having to get into detail of how a chapter works or how Imperial Guard get transported to a world or whatever it might be, then suddenly you're asking questions that the background till that point hadn't had to answer.
Yeah.
And that's always the both the tricky bit, but also the fun bit. I think that's what people like to see as well. If it's done right, it's that one of those you can start adding depth as well as breadth to the background. Sure.
And some people just want to ask those super serious questions about 8 foot tall, genetically bred killing machines that don't necessarily equate into a fantasy setting, essentially, of what we got.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is, exactly. How does it work? How does that function? And particularly, and certainly once you look at, it's the same with the role-playing games and things like that, actually trying to burrow down into a level of kind of detail that will fill out a source book isn't necessarily the best thing to kind of keep the mystery and grandeur of the setting,
Yeah.
And it's the same when you're trying to plot a novel. For instance, I'm doing one at the moment that's set entirely on an Imperator Titan. So how does that work? What does it actually look like on the inside? How do you get from this place to this place, trying to look at pictures of the model or whatever? And sometimes it doesn't, you look at the way that the weapons on the arms are mounted, and you just go, well, that just doesn't work. There's no way for the ammo to get in there. It's an image, so therefore you have to interpret it and ignore the bits that don't work or try not to get too bound by it. And it's the same with a lot of the stuff in 40K and in Heresy as well, although that works a bit better because it's been created from the novels up in many ways, and the stuff that Forge World have done again expands it in a very useful fashion out of what was already created. So you don't get quite so much. There's this really cool thing that was just made up 20 years ago that you have to try and make sense of.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. Have you had any points in writing in the Heresy where either something hasn't worked because it's conflicted, or the nature of the way the story's being told? Because we know that there are various unreliable narrators. Everything's point of view, essentially. Have you had any issues where you really wish you could do something and it didn't quite work? Maybe not telling us what those issues were. But ever felt that frustration?
I think so. I mean, that was one of the things, particularly was great about working with Laurie on this stuff as the series editor, because he had so much in his head, and you were able just to talk, and kind of interpret, not even necessarily interpret, but sort of like decode some of the stuff maybe. So like you read something in a Forge World book and go, oh, okay, that's a bit odd. How does that work? And because he'd been involved with Alan or John had written it or whatever, and then you'd be able to just translate it and say, well, in the situation you're looking at, it would mean X, Y, Z. Oh, yeah, of course, yeah, okay, right, that's how I can include it, or I don't have to worry about that, or whatever it might be. So, he was everyone's second brain on the series, and we're going to be a little bit stuck without him, to be honest, but we'll muddle on. And I suppose, again, it's about one of the best things, I suppose, was actually, I think, particularly Forge World getting involved, sort of was a bit of a kick up the bum in terms of really pushing some of the imagery of the legions and stuff. The early books are quite cautious, really, about what sort of toys the Space Marines have got and things like that. And they're quite, although not in personality, in terms of gear and stuff, they're quite similar to the 40k chapters. And then Forge World started making up stuff, and it was almost a challenge laid down, really. It was like, okay, right, let's really start pushing this then. What? And I think that was, whilst having to keep on top of the stuff they were developing, it was also, in some ways, it just meant that the doors were opened wide then, because they weren't beholden to everything we did, and we could just kind of then start, right, who can come up with the craziest Space Marine super heavy tank then?
Yeah.
Or whatever it might
Who would
be.
ever write about a tank called a Mastodon?
Well, that was it. Yeah, that was it. I mean, I was really pleased with that. I was, I just, because it was one of those. Well, they'd have something. They'd have an even bigger transport. The overriding image I always have of the Horus Heresy, back again from the days of like playing Epic, was in the original sort of Space Marine, and I think it was in a White Dwarf article I dug up not that long ago actually. But there was a picture of all of these sort of like capital imperialis. There's like 4 or 5 of them all lined up going into the horizon, and down the ramps are spilling this army of space wolves. And it's the sort of image that would be used for Imperial Guard in 40k.
Sure.
And it's done with Space Marines, and that always stuck with me. That's the heresy. That's the difference of the scale. Is and so for the Mastodon, it's like, well, they're just going to have some big super rhino thing, aren't they? It's like even bigger than the Land Raider. And the Imperial Fist probably have got one because, they're the guys that like to do sieges and stuff. And that was it. What I needed, and it was also a need for the story at the time, was they needed some way of kind of crossing this no man's land under heavy fire. And so it's like, well, they'd obviously have a big tank that does that, wouldn't they? They've done everything. They've conquered the galaxy. They're bound to have a few siege engines and stuff like that. So, but then to see it actually made by Forge World and my vague descriptions turned into a model was really cool. And again, I tried to do the same with the Raven Guard, really, just throw in descriptions of cool gear and transports and stuff like that. Not necessarily in the hopes that they'd be made, but maybe they might inspire something, either a conversion or Forge World might at some point go, oh yeah, actually we should make a whisper cutter and put that in one of our books. So,
and even if it doesn't, the fans will make their own versions. Because they're cool and because and it enhances the story to have these cool things. So
absolutely.
It's not even like we need the official model to do it, which is cool. Awesome. Yeah. So you talk about the Raven Guard there. You've done a few short stories with the Dark Angels. How good was it to finally get a hold of the Lion in a novel?
That was cool. I mean, it was. It had an interesting birth, Angels of Caliban, because. And one that really benefited it in the end, because originally there were two Dark Angels storylines going on. So the Lion had gone off to Imperium Secundus, and then there was Luther, obviously, and the whole storyline with Zahariel on Caliban. And I'd kind of been a bit more involved in building up the Caliban side of stuff. So I'd sent off. We knew that sort of like Dan had his plans for. To like the Triumvirate in Imperium Secundus, I sort of released the Lion towards him and let him carry on with that.
Sure.
And then I was going to be more interested in what Corswain was doing and what was happening on Caliban. And then Dan was going to do he originally had his Dreadwing novel planned, which was part of Imperium Secundus. But then for whatever reasons, him being busy and also I think actually by that time the editors realised we needed to kind of just move the pace up a bit. And I think Dreadwing it sounded like it was going to be a cool story that Dan had planned, but it didn't really move stuff along massively.
Right.
It was more of an exploration of like a bit of the Dark Angels and the history and things, but I think the Heresy as a narrative was kind of still going to be pretty much where it was at the end. And by that point, I think the calls for it to start moving a bit quicker were starting to become a bit more vociferous. So basically Dan wasn't going to be writing Dreadwing, and the Caliban sort of Corswain novel I originally had based ended up having to incorporate elements of what Dan was going to do, which, as I say, turned out great because I think the novel I would have planned originally would have might have felt a bit of a, although important sort of in galactic terms, might have felt a bit like a bit of a side story. One of the issues people have with Descent of Angels, because it's all sort of pre-heresy and set on Caliban mostly, is that it doesn't feel quite like a heresy book. And then one of the issues some people have with Fallen Angels is that it's kind of two stories smashed together into one novel, but they don't really touch.
Sure.
So I was always very wary of. It's like, well, I managed to dodge kind of repeating some of the stuff that people didn't like about Descent of Angels by, it wasn't just like a very Caliban-based story that didn't affect the wider heresy. But I was very aware that I didn't want to just have, well, half the book is basically following the line around Imperium Secundus and half of it's following Luther and his friends around on Caliban, but they're not relevant to each other. So I had to find, although they couldn't physically impact each other, I had to find a thematic link between them, which was essentially the fallout of the Lion's behaviour, and basically him as a catalyst for essentially the end of the Imperium Secundus and also for the fall of Caliban. So I'm really pleased actually, because it actually made it a lot stronger novel in the end, having to incorporate more of the Lion storyline.
Sure, yeah, no, it's I really enjoyed it. People can discuss their issues and non-issues with the other Dark Angels books. There's a different place for that, really. I'm all for more fleshing out of the story, and I understand now that, fingers crossed, we're going to get that once we've gone past Terror. A setting of the heresy would be a great thing for quite a number of us, I think. But as a Dark Angels writer, how good was it to get a hold of the Lion in somewhere where he could really be the Lion?
Yeah, it was great. I mean, I really enjoyed it, and actually, again, delving into just some. When I did the novella The Lion, we got a little bit of it. I was like, what does it mean when he says loyalty is its own reward, and how he sees himself as slightly apart from his brothers, and how these various things manifest. But then, yet, the best thing about Angels of Caliban and Imperium Secundus is like it's got a critical mass of Primarchs in very close proximity to each other. So you've got Guilliman and you've got Sanguinius and you've got the Lion, and then to have fun playing around with the enmity between Kurz and the Lion was great fun. So, and I think the bit that sort of like brought it home after chatting to Laurie about, Sanguinius is the Emperor and Guilliman's the statesman and the Lion is the general. And that idea that actually, that just kind of feeds into the Lion's desire or belief that he should have been War Master. This is his new chance to be the new War. It's his chance to be the new War Master. And actually, how does that affect him, sort of thing? And also, playing around with the ideas of going after Kurz and him seeing Kurz as the number one threat, and it's like, well, he might be right. I like the idea where there isn't a clear cut, well, right or wrong. One, because it's not very 40k, and two, because it doesn't make for interesting stories. And actually, so it leaves the reader having to decide: was it a personal vendetta on the part of the Lion, or was he genuinely doing what he thought was right? Now, his version of what's right can be quite different to his brothers or us, but actually, he's. That's part of the character of who he is. He has this slightly, I suppose, he has this vision and this idea of what should be done, and particularly because the setup was that he'd gone over to try and he saw Imperium Secundus as another heresy itself, that it was defying the Emperor, and went over to stop it. That was all that was some really good discussions at the meetings of like how we set our arc in motion and the metaphorical dagger that the Lion has poised at Guilliman's back at the moment, that he's going to declare Imperium Secundus. And then because of the presence of Sanguinius and everything else that happens, he ends up being part of it. And that must kind of rankle with him on some subconscious level. He's bought into this, but is he really bought into it? Or is he trying to sabotage it from within without realising it?
Yeah, he's a very complicated character, the Lion, I love when he first arrives, when Guilliman's not sure, in Imperium Secundus, isn't it? Yeah, where the Guilliman's not sure if it's a good thing or not that he's there, because he is this character who no one's ever quite sure of what he's thinking and how he's acting, because he is so. keeps things to himself and all that. It creates a character who you can understand where the distrust comes for the Dark Angels and then everything else, but he believes that he's doing the right thing.
Yes, yeah, and that's basically the fallout that is, like I say, is the Dark Angels, and what gets the story moving on Caliban, really, which is again the betrayal that Luther feels, by not necessarily the Emperor so much, although they don't, the Calibanites don't like what the Imperium's done to Caliban, but actually that personal betrayal by the Lion. Luther doesn't I had, when I was sort of like planning the book, I had a little matrix of the different characters, and I think it was honour and loyalty were the two factors for each of them, and each of the characters represents different meanings of honour and loyalty, and what those things mean to them. And Luther was one who is in that he's honourable, and he always thinks he's acting honourably, but his loyalty, because he feels himself already betrayed, he doesn't owe anything to the Lion, and he feels his loyalty to the Order and Caliban ranks higher than that. Whereas you get someone like Astalan, who's neither loyal nor, or he sees himself as loyal to another idea, but it's definitely not honourable. And then the Lion himself, who's got his very personal ideas of what loyalty and honour count for. And I think, that was quite useful as establishing the different characters and themes who we were going to follow through the book, and also just for some of the other, characters like Faris Redloss or Holguin, again, not necessarily major characters driving the plot, but looking at slightly other different aspects of what honour is or what loyalty might count for. And that's a theme that runs all the way through the book.
Yeah, absolutely. And how personal they are, as you say, and how varied they are based on circumstance and perceived reactions from people and all that jazz leads to very interesting situations that have great consequences through the whole of the 40k history. It'll be
well, that's it. Yeah, I mean, partly, again, having a good conversation with Alan Bly about what he was doing, sort of like stuff he was creating for the founding of the Dark Angels and the First Legion, and so that idea, and it all feeds back into the 40k stuff, like I say, because for me it's always been the point about the Dark Angels isn't that half of them turn traitor, because that happened to a load of legions. Even the best legions had some people go a bit off the rails, sort of thing. The thing about the Dark Angels is they chose to hide it, and that's that decision 10,000 years ago, which has shaped them for the last 10 millennia. And so, and then that begs the question, why? And then so actually the job of the heresy and looking at the Lion and the Dark Angels, and then what Alan did, even going back to their roots on Terra, is, well, okay, how do we build their personality of secrecy isn't based on them turning traitor, it's based earlier than that.
Yeah.
And actually just the symptom of it is that they lied about what happened on Caliban at the end of the heresy. So, and that's what's really interesting then, is that you've got this continuity then from the Great Crusade all the way through to the 41st millennium, even though it seems so far apart, but actually there's a sequence of events and decisions and that shape them so that you hopefully get to a place where you think, well, they couldn't be anywhere else in the 41st millennium than where they are now because of what's happened.
Yeah, and that's another thing the heresy does, is it sometimes some of the 40k stories can seem a bit far-fetched in terms of, how do they do this? How do they keep that secret? How do this chapter keep doing what they're doing? But actually, small steps over a very long period of time result in very strange ways of dealing with things, which is all great, and it all builds into the mythos, particularly if you are then a Dark Angels fan and you're reading all the Dark Angels stuff. It all just goes into the same melting pot of what they are, which is cool.
Yeah, and I mean that was partly Dan's idea for the Imperial Secundus and stuff like that. It's like just whole swathes of stuff that you don't know about. You say, well, Dark Angels keeping Caliban. So, what happened, events on Caliban? And you go, well, that's nothing. There's a whole second empire that nobody remembers. Yeah. So, and then suddenly everything goes into a slightly different context when you go, literally history is written by the victors. And in this case, they didn't really want to write anything about it. And then just so even not long after the heresy, and again, getting to do some of this, the Beast of Rises, and then sort of like Chris Raitt doing stuff with Battle of the Fang, and Andy Smiley's done a bit of stuff set in the aftermath. And you can see even then how this, like the history is being rewritten, and the Imperium as we know it is being created very purposefully to be ignorant.
Yeah.
And so that, the best thing I liked actually about doing some of the Beast of Rises stuff was, in 40k there's sort of like these rumours of the Dark Angels of the Legion building or whatever it might be with the Unforgiven, but actually that's one of the things that happens in the Beast of Rises with the Imperial Fist successors, is they literally reform almost as a Legion. Yep. And actually the reminder about why the heresy is so bad, and it's because it was the Space Marines that did it. The ones that who built the Imperium, who were supposed to be mankind's defenders, are the ones that turned on it and destroyed it. And that's coloured, although they are sort of like the angels of death, and sort of like the great saviours of the Imperium in the 41st millennium, there's still also this slightly gestalt distrust of the Space Marines through the Adeptus Terra and the High Lords and everyone else, because they can never let the Space Marines have power again. Otherwise, another heresy will happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's why they're less than pleased to see Gilliman return.
yeah. And why Gilliman doesn't let anyone read his books, which was brilliant. Yeah. We also have, so as you said, we've got 4 Primarchs running around in Angels of Caliban. How difficult is it to approach, or is it difficult? Is it a welcome kind of test to have these, these characters are characters plus, in talking to each other. We get to the scene at the end of Angels of Caliban where they're all in a room together. We'll say there's some spoilers here. If you haven't read it, there's some spoilers where Kurz is there and things start to fall apart in the courthouse once the lions capture him. That is 4 Primarchs all talking, who are all supposed to be these, Space Marines are demigods to us. These Primarchs are that much more. How do you approach that?
Well, it's going back to that kind of gods Olympus politicking and personalities and soap opera, though, isn't it? And that's at the heart of the heresy, and what carries it a lot is, amongst all the grand events, is about a bunch of brothers falling out and having daddy issues and all sorts of other stuff. And so, that's encapsulated there between, Sanguinius sort of essentially being very distracted about the whole thing because he's seen himself die somewhere in the future. Gilliman trying to build this thing, knowing that essentially he's invested everything in it, not just sort of like in terms of resources, but actually morally, he needs it to work to justify what he's. It's a circular justification really. If it doesn't work, then it was a waste. So he has to make it work. And then you've got essentially the Lion with his own agenda again of is he really bought into it, or actually is this just again trying to set himself up as a rival to Horus, and Kurz. And the best thing about Kurz, which is, it comes from the Night Lords a bit, which is the one sort of focuses on the idea of terror tactics and stuff. But what they are masters of is psychological warfare, of which they use to, scare the bejesus out of you most of the time. But actually, what Kurz knows is just literally how to push everyone's buttons. He knows how everyone, he has this weird, distorted sense of honesty, or what he thinks he's the only Primarch who really is honest about themselves and his own motivations, and so, and that's how he does his damage. It isn't with chopping people up and kind of screaming at them or smashing them about like Angron or whatever. Is getting into their heads and making them their own enemies, and that's how he he doesn't have to blow anything up really to bring down Imperium Secundus. He just needs a word, and actually he doesn't even need that, because they've already, the actions of the Lion, the dishonesty of the Lion, and the antagonism he already had with Gilliman, and the fact that they can't, it's inevitable, and he just needs to give it, he just literally has to breathe on the first domino, and then it all just collapses really. But he knows that just where he has to kind of breathe to make that happen. and then suddenly it becomes this huge exercise in vanity,
Yes.
All because of the personalities involved, and that's at the heart of heresy. Again, it was these demigods of demigods and their agendas, and that's the thing to remember, I suppose, and it really reinforces it. You want to write characters who feel like they're trying to achieve their own thing; they're not just there for the plot. When you get to the Primarchs, that's front and centre. All of them are there, not just to kind of have cool fights, but they all exist for a reason, and they all are trying to achieve something. And some of them are doing better at that than others, and I think, and that's certainly where the conflict comes from. And it's good fun to explore that then.
Yeah, it's quite a good way. When you look at, kind of remember reading the book, it comes through quite well. And at the end of the day, as we know with Primarchs, we talked to plenty of authors and everything else, their flaws are as highlighted as their strengths. So when Kurz can get a knife in to that little chink in their armour, he can really exploit that.
Yes.
Say whether what he thinks he's doing is quite as honourable as and everything else, that as you say, it's a warped sense of what he's trying to achieve. But that's the nature of Kurz, especially at this point in the heresy.
Well, that's it. Again, I mean, one of the things is, and again, trying to write the heresy, you try and doing it on two levels, which is it's just an engaging story in its own way, and you're hoping to try and, I don't want to say trick people, but to sort of like maneuver people into a position where they're not thinking about what happens next. If you help them forget they know what's going to happen and get caught up in the story, but also on another layer, you use the fact that they know, some readers know what's going to happen, and so actually what they're intrigued about is how it's going to get there.
Yeah.
And so sort of like confounding expectations. One of the things in that first heresy meeting that was very much sort of hammered into me really, which was a lot of the heresy is meant to be about revelation. Lots of people know what happened, but actually the novels and the stories are all about why and how. It's not just the big picture stuff, but it's how did that happen? Why did that happen? And did it happen the way you think it did? So the results are kind of the same, although some bits get tweaked. How far is Noma gone? That was just like completely left field. Well, that was just here's a new thing, and there's always scope for that. But also just you thought you knew what happened when the lion met the wolf. Well, actually, here's a little bit more background behind that, and it may be not quite as clear cut as an Index Astartes article in one paragraph describes it.
Yeah.
So, the tricky bit with Kurz and the Lion really was trying to, I think it was it fight number 4 they have there or something like that.
Yeah.
So
keeping it fresh.
Trying to keep that fresh and a different, again, it comes down to motivation really and having some fun with the Lion and actually, that kind of sort of deciding that he's not trying to kill Kurz. Actually, that's the bit, and that's how he beats him. Kurz is so focused on the fact that he thinks the Lion's trying to kill him, that becomes his own undoing. And actually the Lion being savvy enough to work out the only way he can kill Kurz is the only way he can defeat Kurz is by not trying to kill him. And then that's suddenly his whole prescience thing doesn't kick in and all that kind of stuff. So, and also just bringing friends to the fight as well. Again, there's quite a bit. I like the idea that Kurz is starting to lose himself in his own theatrics and his own expectation. He's almost driven by his own internal narrative. You can imagine him monologuing too much and things like that, because he's not necessarily like a Saturday morning villain, but actually just his mania and the voice that's driving him to do stuff is just getting stronger and stronger. And actually, when he thinks he's might die, and actually that whole idea that everything he's believed is going to crumble around him, and that actually the visions and the justification and the evil righteousness that he has is just about to be swept away, and he's broken and then we realise that he's not actually killed. But so these are all kind of formative for Kurz as well, these moments.
He felt very much to me not like the Jack Nicholson Joker, but by the Heath Ledger Joker. And he's very much trying to prove something, trying to achieve something with this mania. It doesn't ever become too over the top, but it's there affecting everything that he does.
Yeah, and it's and I suppose sort of hints now and again of frustration that he's not appreciated, that people just he's he's sending the message and people just aren't quite listening to it. They're not getting it. He's not being understood no matter how hard he tries, because the harder he tries for him is getting more and more insane basically, and kind of self-driven to try and achieve this thing. So and again it's just nice to add some more nuances into, not that the nuance wasn't there before, because Aaron's done some great stuff with Night Lords and stuff, but just again a just slightly different take, a different layer to him, because I think that's what really helps with the Primarchs, is various people pass them on and we each explore a slightly different facet, or we're looking for different parts of storytelling to sort of tease out of them.
Yeah, definitely. You said the line brings friends. We have as you've said, that you had talked to Alan about the organisational structure of the Dark Angels, and we have the Dreadwing, who are very new at this point to us, and very non-standard in the way they act, and their weaponry as well is very non-standard to the other legions. Was that just fun to explore the ways they work, or did you sometimes think, oh, how am I going to make these guys actually work when I'm writing a battle?
A combination, I think, again, just pushing it, the idea, so, it's quite, again, it's one of those differences between background and story, where Alan had this great idea of, there's this organisation within an organisation, there's like the template of the Legion just been laid on over top, but actually they still have these brotherhoods within it. And so, well, literally, how does that work? And so, how do you form the Dreadwing? How does this secondary rank structure work? That sort of thing. So, and I try not to go into too much detail, just because, again, detail destroys some of it. But actually, by example, so we've got the battle near the start where the Dreadwing are assembled, and just being able to, I'd say having fun with it. So, the bit where Red Loss is like, are you sure you want to do this? To the commander, he's like, are you sure? Because once you press this button, that's it. It's Dreadwing all the way, and we can't be. It's like warranty void, basically. And again, he was quite interesting. Red Loss, just to add a little bit, character into him. So he's facing off against the Khorne guys, and he's the World Eaters, but you can start seeing the first touches of sort of like that Khorne leanings and the butcher's nails and stuff, and he's kind of quite dismissive of it, because actually he is a bit of a psycho himself, but a genuine kind of slightly sociopathic thing. But for him, it's all about destruction on a grand scale. He doesn't care about personal combat. It's more about, he just likes seeing things broken. Which again, amongst the Dark Angels, this heroic legion of like paladins and crusading knights sort of thing. So that's a slightly different sort of mindset to have.
Yeah.
But then just cool toys again, and some of that was extrapolated backwards really from, I say, what was in 40k now, with this sort of like void tech and warp tech of things like dark shrouds and all this. So what was one of the signature things about having Terran technology as opposed to sort of like the Martian technology? And one of the things is, obviously, particularly with the Emperor's involvement, there's a lot more knowledge about the warp and how that works. So they've got more warp cores and things. But the idea, and then I've forgotten what I called it now, but there's the spaceship, which basically is the it's got a big massive rift cannon sort of thing. And because I get to write in both 40k and the Heresy, so I think there's just a throwaway line in the third Legacy of Caliban, which basically mentions that ship by name. So that ship's still around in the 41st millennium somewhere with the capabilities it's got, and the Dark Angels still get to play around with it, but obviously probably keep it quite secret.
Yeah.
The
Lion wouldn't want to wake up with that one gone.
Yeah. And so again, so you're looking at void shells and all sorts of other stuff. And as I say, that's what I was mentioning earlier, really, just trying to push it a little bit then, not just being limited to, they've got Terminators and Land Raiders and Dreadnoughts or whatever. So no, they've got this whole whole other types of kit. They've got these sort of like the equivalents of their destroyers and phosphex and all the bad stuff. But actually, and then it kind of it comes back to sort of like Kerr's, actually, in some ways. One of the questions that kind of gets asked or debated really is like, why did the Emperor put up with Kurz? Why did he give a legion to Angron? Like, because they were broken, well, he had a use for them.
Absolutely.
The Dark Angels and the Dreadwing, and that, you go, no, he wanted people to break things. If he wanted to break something, then he could send the World Eaters. He doesn't really matter. It doesn't bother him if Angron's a little bit broken. It's like, well, maybe he wanted him that way, or maybe Kurz is the way. Again, well, why would he put up with Kurz? Because he likes Kurz the way he is, because he's got a use for that sort of Kurz. And the idea that all of these things, both good and bad, were once distilled down into the Dark Angels through the 6 hosts is really cool. And that's kind of where the Dreadwing really kicks in, I suppose, of like, of having some of the nastier toys and stuff out there as well. If you want something broken, you deploy the Dreadwing. And then hopefully we'll see what happens with the Firewing and the Stormwing and things like that in a bit more detail, really. Like I said, I didn't want to try and get into it too much. One, just to try and avoid too much exposition in the book. Yeah. So that's the other difficulty is people want, especially with the Forge World books, sort of like not being out for certain legions and things. They want, they're hungry for background material. But novels aren't background; they're novels, they're stories. They need to, exist on those terms, and sometimes that's a bit difficult. You don't want to do these massive info dumps.
No.
So I mean, I think it's kind of slightly. I did it in a fairly exposition-y way anyway, but I just have one of the characters explaining to another character how it used to work, sort of. But even then, some of the mythology is already coming in. They don't really. By this point, it's like 250 years later, but it's already become a bit of a copy of a copy. A lot of the original Dark Angels aren't alive anymore, so there's already a bit of a degradation of what the original 6 hosts were like and what their purpose was. And then I say multiply that by 10,000 years, and nobody's got a clue.
Absolutely, yeah, and that helps keep that mythology, as you say. I'm wary that we've been recording a little while, so I do want to just move on to we'll deal with Angels. I really enjoyed it, I must say. I finished reading Lorgar today, your Primarch novel, indeed. Yeah. How was that? What's the process for that? Because obviously we've been told that it might not necessarily be the people who are associated with legions and things like that. How did you get your hands on Lorgar, Bearer of the Word?
Well, so yeah, I mean it was the same with everything really. Although we might have our sticky fingers all over particular legions or characters, it's like there's nobody belongs to anybody. But the thing is, once you start writing somebody's storyline and you've got plans for it, it's hard to transfer them across. Sure. So Graham's always had this big scheme for Magnus and the Crimson King, and it's all this a bit like Magnus himself. It's all this arcane goings on in his head. And although he can kind of sit down and explain some of it, actually the best person to write it is Graham. And similarly with the arc for Korak, I had an emotional arc and some sort of like milestones, I suppose, that he was going to travel through. So when sort of Laurie phoned me up a while back, last year now, I suppose, and said, did I want to write something for the Primarch series? And he said, so do you want to do the Lion or Korak? And I said no, because for 2 reasons really. First one was because it's nice to let somebody else have a go actually and see what they do with their stories. And 2, because I kind of have written them. And I'm not sure, if I had long enough, I'd come up with a different story. But I've written what I see as Korak's story.
Sure.
Not in it's definitive, nobody can write about him, but it's like, that's what I wanted to write about him. So I'd have to try and find something else to write about him and try and to make it different, And similarly with the Lion, although that said, I've had a conversation with Nick recently and I may end up doing the Lion. I wasn't going to, but I had an idea and I pitched it to him and he got quite excited. Okay. So that might happen. That's quite far down the way, so the Lion will be one of the last ones.
Chris already did him quite well in the Rust book, so
yeah. Well, it's finding, because it's not just it's because it's the the brief for the series really in a way is these signature moments. Yeah. So obviously some of them are actually covered in the Heresy itself. You can't just do another one of Horus on Davin, as important as that is. But you have to try and find another, either create or dig up another event or situation which is going to be so, because it doesn't have to necessarily be pivotal in that sense, but it just has to really encapsulate who they are, or why they are the way they are. And then so I said, well, I'm not interested in the Lion or Corax, but who else have you got? I did say, well, if Sanguinius is up for grabs, I'd do that, because I'd still love to write more about Sanguinius, but Jim's still fairly keen to do that. Again, it's nothing's ever, inked on a contract or anything, but it's like, Jim's had time to build up storylines and things, so I suppose it's his prerogative if he's got something in particular in mind he wants to do with it.
Sure.
And so I was then offered Horus and or Lorgar as possibilities that they wanted to do quite soon. And obviously Horus was very tempting, first of all. You thought, one just financially. Everyone's going to want to buy the Horus one. But then going back to what I was saying earlier about there's a lot of threads and trying to tease out a story that was my own out of that and make sure it fits in with everything else. And it sounded like a lot of hard work. So, whereas Lorgar, as soon as I said Lorgar, I kind of already knew the story I wanted to tell.
Sure.
Because I've been, I quite like Lorgar anyway, in the Word Bearer's journey, and kind of like the religion side of 40k. Like I said, one of my earliest projects was Sisters of Battle, so kind of quite steeped in it, and I've always like exploring those ideas. So that was one that I went, okay, I'd have to do a lot of work and to basically kind of manufacture a story I think would be good for Horus, whereas actually I already know the Lorgar story, not in detail, but just like I know. Actually, we're going to wind it right back, and actually, there's that relationship between him and Corferon. Let's have a look at that. And basically almost a one-line pitch over the phone to Laurie, and he was quite excited. So that was it, really. We decided to go with Lorgar.
Excellent, yeah, and we do get that. We get, pretty much from the discovery of Lorgar on and his education under Corferon and others as well. I won't go too much into it because obviously it's brand new out and had me cursing Corferion's name. Everyone hates Erebus and quite rightly, but I've always thought, but it's Corferon who's the one who kept it alive. It's always Corferon.
No, definitely. He's, I mean, in a way, Erebus. I think we took out a reference. Basically, there's a bit at the end where there's a mother presents a baby to be blessed by Lorgar at one point, and in the original, in the first draft, it was like, "Can you bless my son, Erebus, please?" But we looked at the timings and we weren't quite sure if that could be him, and also it was just a bit on the nose. But in my head, it is. But he's a product. Erebus is a product of Lorgar and Corferon, in a way. They made him. So as much as he's kind of got his own agency in that, actually, like I say, much more of it really rests on the shoulders of Corferon for creating that in the first place. But I mean, it's just the kind of the chaos angles and the gods and all kinds of other stuff is just fascinating. And we don't do, because I've mainly been writing with the loyalists, so I haven't really got to explore much of that side. There's a little bit of it with Corax's story. He had a little bit of a conversation with the Emperor about the warp first thing, and he's got this kind of this idea, or this growing paranoia that the Primarchs are warp tainted and therefore don't belong. But with Lorgar, I just get to really dive into that side of stuff about the difference between belief and faith and reality, and and like I say, and just absolutely, Corferon is just a dick. But has his moments as well. It's weird, I think he's trying. He is terrible and actually utterly unsympathetic, but he's true to himself all the way through. I think that's the thing I wanted. Again, he doesn't do it. He's not a terrible person because he wants to be a terrible person. He's a terrible person because he has beliefs that things should be a certain way.
Yeah, and he's selfish. That, I found it really entertaining. Actually, it was things I hadn't thought about. There were a number of times where I was like, "Oh, if only this had happened, if only that had happened," as you want with a heresy. The mythology of the heresy, let alone the mythology of 40k. This is the mythology of the heresy. I found it really good, actually. It was I found these as you said earlier, the main series quite rightly has to move on towards the end goal because the public demands it. But I don't want to lose these quite. There are so many stories which really flesh out why and how the heresy is working and why it's working that way and the consequences of it and what could have been across so many little ifs and buts.
Yeah, I mean, the whole for me, for Lorgar, the idea was to provide a different context that you could view the whole heresy from. Lorgar's story in particular, but also just, like I say, the kind of some of the fundamentals really about, how the heresy began, like I say, with the likes of Erebus and things like that, and go, well, this is where he began. And you can't do that within the,
No.
You either end up having to do like flashbacks and things in one of the contemporary novels, or, like I say, you make the most of a series that allows us to hop around in time. And it was interesting because it was a little bit risky, sort of like what I'd agreed in the story I came up with. And Laurie suggested the framing device of the kind of the contemporary chapters, which again became essential to the story actually. And I think, all about showing Lorgar in a slightly different context and Corforon as well. But also, just from a marketing point of view, it had to have some Horus Heresy elements in it. But actually, now that it's done and it's a really cool story, it's something that can be explored again. With Guy did quite a few bits of origin story with Perturabo, whereas this takes it one step further. I think it is the origin story, or stage one of the origin story. And not necessarily that the other Primarch books will ever necessarily go that far back. Some of them might, but we've opened that door now. It's a possibility that some of these books can be set that far back.
Yeah, absolutely. We can find out just how well Guilliman learns to count, that kind of thing. But yeah, you're quite right. Some of the stories almost don't need to be told. And some of them do. And I didn't realise that Lorgar's origin story was one I wanted to learn, if you know what I mean, until I read it, and it was like, oh yeah, I suppose it was. It just hadn't crossed my mind, whereas some of the others are much more obvious. But yeah, no, it's very cool.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yes.
Yeah.
And good fun, like I say, good fun. I mean, and creating a whole world. And again, that's another one of those where what seems like a good thing. So in First Heretic, it's basically a throwaway line that Aaron wrote about a day on Colchis lasts 2 weeks, 2 Terran weeks or something like that. Which sounds good when you just, you've got 2 scenes set on Colchis in your novel and it doesn't really matter. When you've got an entire book there. So I had to sit out and work out how does that actually work with humans who are essentially based around a fairly static diurnal cycle and stuff. It's like how do they not go crazy? How do they incorporate the fact that it's a bit like people that live near the Arctic Circle and having to spend the entire summer without night and then the entire winter without day sort of thing. People adapt. So, but actually, this should have a profound effect on the culture of the planet and not just a throwaway thing. So it was little things like that, and how does a worldwide church work, and all that kind of stuff. So it was great fun from a world-building point of view. Although the background's there, there's still so much that has to be worked out for each of these novels in terms of detail of worlds and kind of bits of the setting that haven't been covered yet. So that was good fun doing that.
Brilliant. Excellent
Even
stuff.
if I did curse his name at first.
Yeah, I can imagine. Brilliant stuff. Okay, so I think we're almost done. You do have some... do you want to talk about anything you've got coming up?
Okay, right then. Yeah, so Lorgar's out special edition, isn't it? Next up is... I don't know exactly what's next up, but I've been working on a new 40k novel of the Eldari, so sort of... called Ghost Warrior, which is set in the new 40k, Dark good. Imperium type stuff, which is my book one of the series called Rise of the Inari. That was good fun. Features a space cat, which is always good.
It's going to sell. It's going to sell.
It will, yeah. Adventures of Space Cat. It's going to have his entire spin-off series, I think,
Yeah,
in audio.
Cartoon series on Nickelodeon. It'll be
Yeah. Yeah. And then I've just finished doing the rewrites for Ashes of Prospero, which is a 40k Space Wolf story about Niall Stormcaller leading an expedition of ragtag Space Marines back to the ruins of Tizca to try and find the remnants of Bulvai's 13th Company.
Oh, awesome.
In the portal maze. So that was again a bit of a setup when I did the 13th Wolf. Not intended at the time. I didn't know I was going to be writing this, but it's left hanging. So it's like, oh, well, I know that. I can go back and explore that a bit more. So that's quite fun. Sort of first time I've had a real play with the Space Wolves, really, since the 13th Wolf. I'm writing a novel at the moment called Imperator: Wrath of the Omnisire.
And this is the one set on the Imperator Titan, is it?
Yeah, that's excellent. Right. So, which is it's quite fun. But I've written half the story. There's two main characters, and I've written most of one character so far, but I've got to do the other one. And the character I've written so far is more of the intriguey stuff going on, kind of internal adventure, and the other character is more of the big Titan stomping things stuff. Yeah. So we'll see how those two blend together when I get to edit them together. But so and then I've got a whole bunch of stuff to pitches and things I've been chatting over with Nick at that library. They're keeping me busy for the next year, 10 years.
Brilliant. And you also got your own series, the Empire of Blood. Yeah,
I mean that's quite old now actually. I'm just flogging copies. Well, we're giving away a copy of that on my newsletter. So that was released. That's a original fantasy trilogy that was released via Angry Robot. On sort of like the original fiction front, I've got a novella, sort of long novella coming out as part of a series which is called Cryptid Clash.
Oh, that's right.
So cryptids being sort of unexplained monsters. So it's kind of cryptids meet old Monster Mash type movies. So it's one cryptid versus another, Yeti versus Bigfoot or something like that. So there's a series of 6, I think. So I've done one of those, but actually Black Library fans will know also that. So Josh Reynolds has done one, and also I think David Annandale. So that's looking like a fun series. Again, that's just like, I love sort of cryptids and things like that. So it's a very different kind of storytelling from 40k and just having some fun with it, really. So I've done a sci-fi story. Cryptids in space.
Excellent. Awesome. Yeah, so just because some people might not be fully aware that you have these other books out there, so you can go to, you can find out if you want, gavthorpe.co.uk.
That's the one, yeah. You can sign up to my newsletter there, which is a very good idea. Obviously find out what's going on, but every other month there's a prize draw of all the subscribers, and you win a signed copy of. Sometimes it's sometimes it's your choice. Sometimes it's my new release, or like I say, this month it's Empire of the Blood. And then also I'm on Twitter as Gav Thorpe Creates, or you can find my Facebook page. I'm out there. I regularly do sort of like compile Q&As and stuff. So if people have got questions, they're free to send them in.
Yeah, and I would say if anyone is want to be writer or anything, definitely sign up for the newsletters, because sometimes you're putting bits and pieces in there that you've collected or written down or what have you. I'm not a wannabe writer, so I flick through them more than others.
There's quite a bit of writing advice on the blog, but also on the newsletter I've got like my Kickstarter of the month, which is either one I've backed or something that's cool. But also there's usually a submissions window of the month as well that people might be interested in. And a few people have got in touch saying, "Oh, that's great! I wrote a story for that one." Or whatever. So I try to get gamers, writers, and readers basically are the three strands of what I do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, thanks for coming on. This is, I say I think I started when I was 11, 1992 in the hobby. So kind of you've been there almost the whole way through my hobby experience, watching the different Gavs appear as the photo changes in White Dwarf. Yeah. And got to play in the games and read the books and finally get you on the show, which is always good, because I've been meaning to do this for so long.
Yeah, for years. So. Well, that's great. Thanks. It's great to chat to you, and I'm sure I'll see you soon.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to be at I'll probably be at an event that you're up at Nottingham, I'm sure, because you are quite regularly. And we'll get you back on to chat about another book, I'm sure, soon.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
All right, brilliant. Thank you very much for coming on, Gav.
Thanks for having me. Cheers.
Cheers. And that's another show, which is really cool. It's great to have Gav on. Should have done that much earlier, but finally got round to it. There is something we didn't talk about earlier in the show that we probably should have, and we're going to just mention it now because it's rather good news, particularly for certain people in the community, more than others. But we all benefit. Yeah. So, Games Workshop's, what we got there, their end-of-year financials, basically, or their yearly financials, haven't we? The report.
Yeah, so they release a statement. They, like most companies, they release a statement on what they project their profits or losses to be. And obviously, if a company says, "Well, we don't think we're going to make as much money as we thought we would this year," their shares drop like a rock. And if they say, "Yep, everything's going great," and their shares go up, and that's pretty much what Games Workshop said.
Yeah, we have. This is the end of the year. They also do a half-yearly one, don't they? Around January it comes out normally.
Yes.
Which is all usually is the doom and gloom one, or used to be. But yeah, we've had a pre-tax profit jump by 126%. So that is healthy, and this is remember. So this is to the end of this financial year for them, or fiscal year. So we're looking pre-8th edition now. Rumours of 8th edition might have helped certain aspects of things, who knows, but it's to May 28th, so actually this is really early when you think about that. And they've £38.4 million profit. That's not bad, pre-tax, which is pretty cool. And
I could live with it.
They've also announced, I mean, there are certain issues here. Weakened sterling saw, was it that I believe the weekend that Brexit happened and then the pound dropped, that Forge World site outsold the GW site that weekend.
Yes, yeah.
So all the people across the ponds, the various ponds, coming and buying their 40k and Heresy cheaper than they've ever seen it before. Which
I saw somewhere there was a 70% increase in sales or something. Due to Brexit, and I remember reading it thinking, Brexit, such a bad thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, we won't go into that. We'll keep way away from any conversation about that. 3/4 of its sales coming from overseas, so yeah, that's going to help. But it's not just that, obviously. We also had the last couple of years, they've spent a lot of money, haven't they, on moving stores, rebranding stores, money spent on Warhammer World with things like the display hall, things like that. So there are those investment. Yeah, and there hasn't been as much investment this year. And I'm not saying that's the only reason, that these things have happened. But it does certainly take part of what they're doing. They're also there haven't been a huge amount. We had Warhammer Total War come out, but we're waiting for a few computer games to come out, aren't we? There have been a few iOS apps games, but it's not like the computer game market has exploded with GW stuff. But we know there are a few coming, because that's been a criticism in the past, was like their licensing had resulted in a lot of this. And you've got to remember as well that Fantasy Flight Games and GW pretty much ended their relationship a year ago. Mm-hmm. So, Fantasy Flight sold off all the remains of their GW stuff in their sales, that kind of thing. So, yeah, GW have bought stuff in-house, but they are also, licensing games out and other things as well. But, yeah, and we know that, Canticle 7 have got the rights to, they're doing the Warhammer Fantasy roleplay, and they're also doing an Age of Sigmar roleplay as well. And that was something, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay was a Fantasy Flight thing. So they're still doing that. But it's cool. We've got we've got a strong GW. Now, a lot of this is probably down to a change of approach. We know that Age of Sigmar is outselling Warhammer by a considerable margin, what Warhammer used to make. We know that the community outreach, whether it's through Warhammer community, whether it's through the videos, whether it's through being at events and actually being seen to support these big events, whatever has made people change the way they view the company and come back as well. I also think the rapid release, the cool toys they're putting out has been, again, better than it has been before. And that's all credit to GW. You know, a lot of people are putting it down to just that outreach. You know, Kevin Roundtree has taken over, however long ago it was, 2.5 years. And it seems to be a lot of a change of shift in approach, and that seems to be paying, you know, a great amount back to them, which is really good to see. Now, you might also say, I haven't actually had a look around. There might be other games companies that are struggling a little bit more than they were. Because, again, we talked about there's only so many people in this market. And this kind of growth isn't just new people. So whether they're winning people back or whether people are coming back, who knows? Bit of both, probably. But I can see the way GW are doing things. When other companies have done them and been credited for doing them, it does appear that GW have gone, actually, yeah, about time we did it. Cool, we're doing it. Well, if we're going to do it, let's do it, but let's do it a step further. And things like Warhammer on Twitch is probably a prime example of that.
Yeah, no, completely. I think they've made a lot of good decisions of late. I think they're reaping the benefits of it, and I think I think it's set also to possibly even go better than they've already seen. Like, you know, with these figures that they're publishing, I think that, you know, we're at the first start of this, and obviously that's had a big impact on the share price.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we look at 8th edition, and we've already talked about the demand for 8th edition outstripped kind of the higher rated expectations than they wanted to. So that shows that there's something there. And with 10 codexes coming out before Christmas, that's a lot of excitement generated. You know, a lot of army books being purchased, a lot of new models being purchased to fit those army books. So I think they're in a pretty good position. I think 8th edition is potentially, much like Age of Sigmar, is a gateway for people who for wargaming was a bit too complicated and a bit too involved, should I say. Not necessarily complicated, but involved.
Yes,
I think there's potential there, actually, from where we said it's a limited market, there's a potential there to grow that market quicker than would have happened 3 years ago. Because even looking at competitors, yeah, there are some very straightforward games, but they're less well known. You know, you look at the big guys who are making games like Privateer Press and Malifaux. They're not difficult to play, but they're very involved. And well, from the last time I played them anyway, before anyone gets in, you know, I certainly think it's much easier with power levels in 40k now to just go, do you want to play? Here's a however many power level game. Let's go. And within 10 minutes, anyone should know what they're doing, really. So yeah, I think there's a lot to be seen coming from that going forwards. This is on top of, we know Blood Bowl did extremely well, to the point where we still haven't seen Adeptus Titanicus, because you know, Blood Bowl's made them reassess how they do that. I don't know about Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, I must admit, but we've got Heresies. Again, we've seen just from the event scene in the UK, we've seen how many people are playing that now compared to a couple of years ago. Again, the plastic boxes making it more available. I certainly think that's an element of that success. What was really interesting was actually the amount of 40% of overall sales came from its retail chain.
Yes, yeah,
and that's their own retail chain.
Yeah, and which you think sometimes you may consider that the independents and online and everything like that possibly do the stores struggle. Are they valid? But clearly they are.
Yeah, they're still first point of contact for a lot of particularly younger kids, families who don't know about this hobby so much. Again, we've talked again about people who don't know that podcasts exist. They don't know about forums online. They don't know about many Facebook groups. Just because they think maybe it's a smaller hobby than it is. So it does allow, a Games Workshop is a place they can go to. And a lot of us we like to actually go somewhere as well, to meet people. And if you don't have how do you find out about your local, gaming club? Sometimes it's not easy to do. So, yeah, it's fine. And if you've got kids, if you're a kid, you might not be allowed in that gaming club because it's in a bar or working man's club or whatever as well. So there is an element of that. Obviously, this is England we're talking about here. In America, they have a very different system, and Australia and Canada and Sweden and wherever else as well. A little bit more of those independent hobby gaming shops, whereas GW still really have, a huge presence on the high street, which sometimes can adversely affect the independents. But yeah, that's the nature of business, isn't it?
It is, yes. But
yeah, they're looking at marching on, I think.
Yeah, no, I think recent stats will show you that they're doing well. I can't see it changing, unless there was a massive U-turn on what they're doing, So I think it all is looking very rosy.
Yeah, and it's funny how people attribute. We don't know from the outside fully exactly everything that's going on in the inside, but we've had an announcement that Toby Kirby is actually stepping down from his role after the AGM in September, and that'll be the next kind of thing that I might try and keep my ear to the ground on that. But we've got a real change of guard, and that's and I don't. Again, some people really rail against Toby Kirby. I don't know the guy. I only know bits and pieces from what I've heard. And what it seems to me is he had a very different idea of the role of how to go about things. And maybe it was a little bit outdated. Yeah, we're looking at a whole new world compared to maybe those things. I don't necessarily think that all of his decisions were as bad as people think they are. The money they put into the retail to move it to what they're doing has obviously saved them money and set them up. And people moan about one-man stores. They're a bit frustrating, but if that's the only way they can make them work viably, then that's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, that's the key, isn't it? If it's not viable, then you can't keep a business open that's not viable.
No. Yeah, and this is me looking from the outside. It's been a long time since I worked for GW. I can be assured of that. But it's these guys, they work hard, these guys in these stores. And I know my local store manager, fairly well. We chat about things, and the way GW run it, they've got targets to hit, and those targets are sometimes quite difficult to hit because they push. It's a company that want to make money, but they'll be pleased to see that increase in retail sales because they know that they're going to be able to hit those targets a little bit better, which is going to make next year even harder.
Yeah, that's always the problem, isn't it?
And that's the nature of working in a business like that with target-driven sales. But there we go. It's all part of the fun. So I just wanted to chat about that. If you've got any info you think we're way out of order, way wrong, then let us know. I'm certainly considering grabbing a few shares myself. And
I've got some, and I'm laughing all the way to the bank.
Indeed. Yeah, I just need to find the money now. That's the next thing. In fact, talking about that, moving swiftly on, what a segue. I've actually put a bit on the website, the Imperial Truth website. Now, I'm finally decided that I'm probably going to go to the Las Vegas Open 2018. Haven't booked anything yet. I got a text message off my mate Michael, and it just said I may have purchased a ticket for the Age of Sigmar event there. And I was like, oh, well, if he's going. So, as I say, at the moment, my missus just about to move into mine. We're looking to save up to go and buy a new house and various other things like that. I'm looking at leaving. Well, I am leaving my part-time firefighting work after 15 years. It's just time, and spending more time with the missus and all that kind of jazz. Unfortunately, in a small village, it means you don't have many options in going out. So that's a chunk of money disappeared. So I'm selling off like all those unwanted toys I've got. So there's not a huge amount of treasure in there now, but there are bits and pieces that you might be interested in. If you go to theimperialtruth.com, and in the top right you'll see support sales, I think it's called, and you can click on that and I'll update that as I go with bits of Warhammer, bits of 40k, some other game systems as well. Just if you see anything you like, then send me a message and we'll try and do a deal on that, and hopefully, fingers crossed, I'll be able to afford a plane ticket over and a hotel and everything else in Las Vegas.
Great.
Yeah, well, hopefully, if I can afford it. I'm sure we'll work it out somehow. But it's not that long now, really. It will start ticking down. So I need to work out what kind of events I'll be playing going over there, because they have a tournament, I think, for 30k. So I might have to have a word with the guys who run it again this year and just see what they got planned. Because I think they've only got 2 30k events as well, which was a bit of a shame. I was hoping that they might have a bit more of a selection like Adepticon.
Mm-hmm.
But, we can go over and maybe I'll play a bit of Age of Sigmar and a bit of Heresy and maybe some open gaming. I don't know. But I know there's a lot of guys going to Adepticon this year. Not just for Heresy either, for other podcasts as well. But the Heresy podcast is going to be, the Aussies are going, Sons of Heresy I think are going as well, Wig Killer. And there's the usual reprobates from that side. I think Miles is going this year as well. It'd be a shame not to go over with him, but I'm hearing the siren call of Las Vegas. And I'm not too sure when I'll be able to do it again, so yeah. If you do want some cool toys, go and check that out. Awesome. But if you've got any feedback for the show itself, you can contact us, Greg at The Imperial Truth.
And I'm Neil at The Imperial Truth.
And if you haven't seen Neil post anything on Instagram in a while, you can bug him on Instagram
at Neil Paints on Instagram and Twitter.
There we go. Yeah. So we want to see more Corax. Tell him to get that done. And of course,
there will be soon.
Yeah. And I'm at Child of Fang everywhere as well. And I did mention right at the top of the show, Fanatic is out. So if you are a little bit interested in what's going on there, I've had some kind reviews. But Fanatic Podcast, if you're looking for it on iTunes, I need to upgrade the tags on it and tidy it up a little bit because it's I've been a bit lazy with that. But there is a Facebook group for it as well, Fanatic Podcast. And hopefully we're going to be covering all kinds of fun stuff on that. Basically, trying to get rid of the stuff that we go off topic on the show to talk about. So fingers crossed we won't be going into Blood Bowl or what have you so much on the show. Try and keep this heresy based. We're off to... You're not coming to the Forge World Open Day, are you?
I'm not. No, I didn't get a ticket.
Okay. Oh, there are the odd one on Facebook going. Just to let people know, if you are interested in going, you can pick up the odd one. Most people sell them at face value as well, which is quite good. But I'll be up there. I'll be trying to tweet from the event as much as possible. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about it. I can't see it being, a massive thing, but we'll certainly be a news part of the show about what's going on up there as well. But if you are there, feel free to say hi. Always good to meet people. Is there anything else you would like to add, Neil, before we head off?
Not a great deal, no.
Okay, well, I will say, actually, if you want to leave a review for the show, then that would be awesome on iTunes. And also, I think you can review Facebook pages now. So
really?
I haven't actually checked this out for our page because I know that I clicked on Miles's Facebook page the other day, Lil Legend Studios, and saw he had some stars reviewed. So if you can do that and you want to review the show, those little things help out as well. If you don't want to give money, that's completely understandable through Patreon or whatever. I'm cool with that. If you want to give us a minute of your time to do a review on either iTunes or Facebook or wherever, then that's brilliant. And if you've got, I know we said if you've got any feedback, if you've got any real kind of things you think we can do better, little things, then feel free to email us as well. because we're always trying to improve, even if the show doesn't reflect that.
Even if it doesn't improve, we are trying.
We are trying our damnedest. But there we go. That's another episode done. Thanks for joining us. You have been listening to The Imperial Truth.